The millionaire CEO went pale when his ex stood before him with twins who shared his face. The hall glittered like a slice of the future. Glass walls rose on every side, sleek screens floated in midair, and rows of industry leaders sat in perfect silence, eyes fixed forward. Cameras blinked softly, microphones waited, and the air carried the polished stillness of a room that knew power when it saw it. At the center of it all stood Chandler Glover, tall, composed, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that fit him like armor. His posture was effortless, the kind of confidence earned through years of control, discipline, and victories no one else could claim. The subtle glow of the holographic display behind him reflected against his face, outlining a man who appeared untouchable. His voice moved smoothly through the space as he presented his company's latest breakthrough, every word measured, every pause deliberate. This was his stage, his world, his domain. The audience leaned in instinctively, accustomed to following his every syllable. To anyone watching, he looked like the man who had mastered everything, time, technology, and people alike. Then, mid-sentence, his gaze shifted, not by choice, not casually. His eyes landed on two figures in the front row, a boy, a girl, side by side, watching him. Something invisible tightened in his chest. His breath wavered, just enough to be noticed by no one but himself. For a fraction of a second, the hall around him softened, the lights dimmed, and the audience blurred into a single distant hum. Chandler did not move, but inside, everything did. Their eyes met his, directly, unflinching, impossible to ignore. Not the curious stare of students, not the polite attention of guests. This was something steadier, deeper, almost knowing. The boy's expression carried a quiet intensity, as if he were measuring every word Chandler spoke. The girl watched with a gentler stillness, but no less piercing. For a heartbeat, Chandler felt the distance between them collapse. The polished hall lost its sharp edges. The floating screens softened at the corners. Applause that had been building somewhere in the background thinned into a distant murmur. The immaculate order of the room, the rows of seated executives, the gleaming glass, the glowing holograms, slid slightly out of focus, as though reality had tilted. His voice, once steady, slowed. A muscle tightened along his jaw, then color abandoned his face, not gradually, not subtly. His skin turned stark, almost bloodless, like a man who had just recognized something he could never have prepared for. His hand tightened around the edge of the podium, knuckles whitening beneath his grip. For a split second, he looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man confronted by a past he had buried too deeply to escape. And then, cutting cleanly through the silence, a clear voice carried from the front row. "You made it all up, 3 words, simple, unadorned, devastating." They didn't shout, they didn't echo, they didn't need to. The sentence landed like a crack in glass, freezing the room in place and stopping Chandler's presentation midair. His breath caught. His eyes remained locked on the twins. The future he had constructed wavered, just enough for the truth to step through. The hall remained frozen, but the moment widened in meaning beyond that single room. Because in that split second, Chandler's stillness reflected something many people recognize, even if they rarely admit it. What does victory feel like when no one stands beside you to witness it? How heavy is applause when it echoes only in empty spaces? How hollow does a skyline look when it belongs to you, but you belong to no one? From the outside, success is bright, decisive, and untouchable. It arrives with headlines, handshakes, and endless praise. Yet, beneath that shine, there is often a quieter truth. The higher someone climbs, the smaller their circle can become. How many late nights are traded for a public image? How many honest connections are sacrificed for strategic advantage? At what point does ambition stop being strength and start becoming a cage? Chandler's face, pale, motionless, exposed, carried those questions without him speaking them. Anyone who has ever chased something larger than themselves could feel it. The pull between achievement and attachment, the tension between being admired and being understood, the thin line between control and isolation. The boy and girl in the front row did not just look like him, they reflected a mirror he had long avoided. Their presence asked without mercy, if you win the world but lose the people who matter, what have you truly gained? The silence in the hall was no longer about shock, it was about exposure. In that suspended moment, Chandler's life reduced itself to a single unvarnished truth, not a theory, not a headline, not a public narrative, but a stark reality staring back at him in 2 familiar faces. He had built everything. A global company that shaped cities, a name spoken with reverence in boardrooms. Yet standing there beneath the gaze of the boy and girl who mirrored him so precisely, the achievement felt suddenly weightless, almost fragile. The issue was not his ambition, it was not his intelligence, it was not even the choices that made him powerful. The issue was what he surrendered along the way. He had chosen distance over presence, strategy over sincerity, image over intimacy. Brick by brick, deal by deal, victory by victory, he had assembled an empire that demanded his heart, and in paying that price he misplaced it. The twins did not need to say anything more. Their existence said it plainly enough. Chandler had mastered the world while neglecting the part of life that gives it meaning. The room around him, the technology, the investors, the flashing cameras, became irrelevant in that realization. They could elevate him, protect him, and celebrate him, but they could not replace what he had walked away from. Power had made him formidable, but it had also left him solitary, and now, in a single piercing instant, the problem stood in front of him, undeniable, unavoidable, unmistakable. The moment did not resolve. It simply hovered, sharp, suspended, impossible to shake. Chandler remained rooted behind the podium, his reflection faintly visible in the glass wall beside him. Beyond it, the city he had conquered stretched endlessly, indifferent to the private reckoning unfolding inside the hall. In front of him, the twins sat unmoved, their presence quietly rewriting the narrative he had spent years perfecting. They were not a mistake in his story. They were the missing chapter he had never allowed himself to read. Somewhere behind them, Mariana stood still, her expression unreadable, her place in his life no longer defined by absence but by undeniable return. And in that fragile pause between breath and thought, a single question tightened the air. What happens when the life you buried refuses to stay buried? When the past does not knock politely but steps into your spotlight? When everything you avoided arrives wearing your own face? The future Chandler had engineered felt solid until this instant. Now it trembled, open to a truth he could neither deny nor escape, because power can build a man, but it can also leave him standing alone when the lights go out. If stories like this, honest, grown, and unsweetened, keep you leaning forward, stay with me. Like, subscribe, and follow along for narratives that feel real, not polished fables. The penthouse sat higher than most people ever dared to live. Glass wrapped every wall, erasing the boundary between inside and out. Manhattan spread beneath it like an endless grid of light, traffic sliding through streets in quiet, luminous streaks, office towers glowing in isolated squares, bridges cutting clean lines across the dark water. Up here the city felt distant, controlled, owned. No noise reached this height, no crowd pressed in, no sirens intruded. The chaos below existed, but only as something to look at, never something to feel. Chandler Glover stood alone at the window, not posed, not performing, simply still. A low table behind him held a half-empty crystal glass of whiskey. The amber liquid caught faint reflections of the skyline, shimmering briefly when he shifted his weight. The room itself was immaculate, minimalist, expensive, untouched by anything personal. No photographs on the walls, no keepsakes on the shelves. Nothing that revealed what mattered to him. His reflection floated faintly in the glass before him, sharp suit, calm face, carefully arranged composure. To anyone looking up from the streets, this was the picture of a man who had everything, but the silence around him was thick, not peaceful, not comfortable, heavy. It pressed against the wide space like an invisible weight, reminding him how vast and empty it felt when no one else occupied it. The city breathed below him, alive and constant, yet up here he stood in isolation, separated from the very world he shaped. He lifted the glass, took a slow sip, and watched the lights flicker across the horizon. Power had placed him above the city, but it had also placed him alone. To the world, Chandler Glover was certainty made human. His name carried weight in every major capital. His company's technology ran beneath streets, inside networks, and across skylines that glittered on magazine covers. When he spoke at conferences, rooms leaned forward. When he invested, markets shifted. When he walked into a boardroom, conversations softened before they even began. Headlines framed him as a builder of the future. Panels praised his vision. Profiles celebrated his discipline, his precision, his unshakable focus. In public, he was never rushed, never rattled, never unsure. There were people who wanted his approval, people who feared his disapproval, and people who would have paid fortunes just to sit at his table. Invitations piled up. Private jets waited. Assistants managed every detail of his life so smoothly that friction seemed to vanish before it could touch him. From the outside, his life looked perfectly assembled, a masterpiece of control, influence, and accomplishment. Inside the penthouse, that image dissolved. The room held no laughter, no late-night conversations, no easy, unguarded moments. The silence did not applaud him or ask him how his day went. It simply lingered, cold and unresponsive. He moved through spaces designed more for display than for living. Furniture that looked impressive but rarely felt warm. Lighting meant to impress, not comfort. A view meant to prove his status, not soothe his mind. When he finished his whiskey, no one refilled his glass. When the city dimmed toward dawn, no one sat beside him to watch it. When his thoughts grew too loud, there was no familiar voice to pull him back into the present. Chandler had become a public monument, admired, analyzed, emulated, yet increasingly detached from anything intimate or personal. The legend stood tall. The man inside it felt quietly diminished. Queens lived in the cracks of his memory, a narrow apartment on the 4th floor of a walk-up building that always smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old cooking oil. Peeling paint curled at the edges of the walls. Floorboards creaked like they were tired. In winter, the windows rattled when the wind pressed too hard. There was one lamp in the living room that flickered if you touched it wrong. Chandler remembered that most clearly, the way the light trembled whenever someone moved too quickly. His mother worked constantly. She left before sunrise, her footsteps soft in the hallway so she wouldn't wake him. She came back long after dark, shoulders slumped, hands rough, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Some nights he pretended to be asleep just so he wouldn't see how tired she looked. His father existed only as absence. No photographs on the walls, no stories told at the dinner table. Just a quiet, unspoken space where a man should have been. As a child, Chandler learned to read silence the way other kids learned to read books. He noticed what people did not say, what they avoided, what they disappeared from. He learned, early and painfully, that people could vanish without warning, and that love, no matter how real it felt, could simply stop showing up. So he stopped expecting it. He stopped relying on it. And instead, he began studying something far more dependable: structure, logic, control. If he could understand how things worked, he could prevent them from failing him. That small, watchful boy, sitting alone at a rickety table with homework spread out beneath a trembling lamp, would one day become the man towering above Manhattan. But back then, he was just a child who believed one quiet truth: if you were not strong enough, you could be left behind. That lesson settled inside Chandler like a quiet law. Not a dramatic vow, not a childhood promise spoken into the dark. Just a steady conclusion he arrived at over years of watching, waiting, and learning. People left. Circumstances shifted. Affection faded. Presence could not be relied upon. Power, however, did not disappear. If he controlled his environment, no one could abandon him. If he mastered his work, no one could outmaneuver him. If he became indispensable, no one could discard him. Safety in his mind did not come from being loved. It came from being untouchable. He began to shape himself around that idea. He studied harder than everyone around him. He spoke less, observed more, and treated every setback like data instead of pain. Where others sought comfort, he sought leverage. Where others leaned on people, he leaned on results. By the time he reached adulthood, the belief was fully formed, clear and unyielding. Power meant stability. Control meant protection. Achievement meant survival. It was not cruelty that guided him. It was caution hardened into strategy. And that single conviction became the invisible engine behind every sleepless night, every calculated decision, every relentless push toward the top. It built the empire. But it also laid the foundation for the emptiness now standing silently behind him in that glass-walled penthouse. The whiskey glass in Chandler's hand was lighter now, its surface catching brief reflections of the city before they slipped away. He turned slightly from the window, letting his eyes travel across the penthouse, not with pride, but with a quiet assessment. The marble floors, the seamless glass, the furniture selected by designers who had never met him, only his reputation. Every detail signaled control, precision, dominance, yet nothing in the room responded to him. No movement, no warmth, no trace that another person had ever truly existed within these walls. He stepped closer to the window again, standing at the exact height where Manhattan appeared almost miniature. From up here, traffic became glowing threads, people became dots, problems became distant. It was a perspective he had carefully engineered. Distance equaled clarity, height equaled authority, detachment equaled strength. That was the framework he had built his life upon: quiet, disciplined, efficient, and deeply solitary. He raised the glass once more, letting the amber liquid sit on his tongue before swallowing. The burn was mild, familiar, almost comforting in its consistency. Unlike people, it never surprised him. Below, the city pulsed on without him, business continuing, deals forming, lives intersecting in ways he would never see. He owned pieces of it, shaped systems within it, influenced its direction, yet remained separate from its human current. That separation had been intentional. Necessary, he had always told himself. He rested his palm against the cool glass of the window, feeling nothing but the barrier between him and everything he had worked to command. For years, this view had validated him. Every light represented a success, every skyline a reminder of his ascent. It proved that his belief had worked, that power had kept him safe, unassailable, beyond harm. But tonight, the same view felt different. Not triumphant, not empty either, just revealing. The man reflected faintly in the glass was composed, immaculate, untouchable in appearance. Yet beneath that polished surface stood the same boy from Queens, still waiting under a flickering lamp, still wary of anyone who might leave. Chandler did not soften. He did not break. He simply stood there, suspended between the life he had built and the parts of himself he had buried to build it. The city glittered. The penthouse hovered above it. The cafe sat on a quiet corner, wedged between a narrow bookstore and a small flower shop that always seemed awake before the rest of the block. From the outside, it looked unremarkable. Faded brick, tall windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside, a hand-painted sign that hung just a little crooked. But once you stepped in, the air changed. Fresh coffee mingled with the faint scent of baked bread, and low conversation drifted through the room like a gentle current. Wooden tables lined the space, worn smooth by years of use. Soft lamps cast a steady glow over shelves stacked with mugs, glass jars of sugar, and small potted plants that leaned toward the light. A slow, unobtrusive jazz melody threaded through the background, never loud enough to demand attention. Chandler sat in the far corner, not because he wanted privacy, though he appreciated it, but because it offered the clearest view of the room and the street beyond. His laptop lay open in front of him, battered with peeling stickers from tech conferences long past. Thick textbooks were stacked haphazardly at his elbow, their pages dog-eared and marked with frantic notes. 3 empty coffee cups formed a small, uneven line beside him. His hair fell messily across his forehead. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. His fingers moved rapidly over the keyboard, pausing only to scribble something across a yellow notepad already crowded with equations and half-formed ideas. He did not notice the barista calling out names. He did not notice the door open and close. He did not notice the soft shuffle of footsteps approaching his table. What he noticed, finally, was the warmth of a fresh cup of coffee appearing beside his laptop. He froze for a moment, then glanced up. A young woman stood there, holding a small tray against her chest. She wore a simple jacket over a floral blouse, her dark hair pulled back loosely, a few strands brushing her cheek. Her expression was not intrusive, only observant, the kind of attention that came from genuine care rather than curiosity. Chandler blinked. "I didn't order this," he said, his voice low and rough from hours of silence. She offered a gentle smile. "You look like you forgot the world exists," she replied calmly. "And people who forget the world usually forget to drink anything that isn't caffeine." For the first time in hours, his fingers stilled. He studied the cup, steam curling upward in delicate lines, then back at her. There was no flirtation in her gaze, no performance, no attempt to impress, just straightforward kindness. "On the house," she added, setting the tray aside. "Think of it as a civic duty." A faint, almost reluctant breath left him, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Civic duty?" he repeated. She nodded. Keeping brilliant but reckless people alive long enough to finish their work. Something in her tone disarmed him. He leaned back slightly, finally taking in the room instead of the code in front of him. The music, the murmur of voices, the soft clink of cups, all of it felt suddenly present again. He wrapped his hands around the mug. The heat seeped into his palms, steady and grounding. "Thank you," he said simply. She gave a small nod, as if that was all she had intended, and turned to leave. But halfway back toward the counter, she paused, glanced over her shoulder, and added without looking back, "Breathe once in a while. The world will still be here when you do." Chandler watched her walk away, then looked down at the coffee. For reasons he couldn't explain, he took a slow breath, just as she had suggested. And in that ordinary, unplanned moment, something in him shifted ever so slightly. She returned to the counter, but Chandler did not return to his work right away. Instead, he studied the coffee. Real coffee this time, not the burnt, forgotten cups he had abandoned hours earlier. He took a careful sip. It was warm, balanced, not rushed, the kind of drink made by someone who paid attention. A few minutes later, she passed his table again, collecting an empty mug from another customer. Chandler caught her eye almost by accident. "Did you poison this?" he asked, lifting his cup slightly. She stopped, brows lifting in mild amusement. "If I wanted to poison you, I'd have done it before you finished 3 cups and ruined your taste buds," she replied evenly. He huffed out a quiet laugh before he could stop himself. That seemed to surprise him more than it surprised her. She glanced briefly at his laptop, then at the clutter of books and notes. "Finals?" she asked. "More like survival," he said. "Deadlines, prototypes, investors who think sleep is a weakness." She leaned against the back of the chair across from him, not sitting, not intruding, just present. "What are you building that requires that much self-destruction?" Chandler hesitated. He was used to summarizing his ideas in polished pitches, clean slides, sharp bullet points, confident promises. But something about her tone, calm, grounded, uninterested in spectacle, made that feel wrong. "Something that's supposed to make cities safer," he said finally. "Smarter infrastructure, better security, fewer systems failing when people actually need them." She tilted her head slightly, considering him. That's ambitious, she said, not impressed so much as thoughtful. He shrugged. Ambition is the only thing I can afford. She didn't challenge him. She didn't pity him. She simply accepted the statement and asked another question. Why that? Chandler looked at the glowing screen, then out the window toward the street where people walked past without noticing him. Because broken systems hurt the wrong people, he said after a beat. And I'm tired of watching that happen. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. What's your name? She asked. Chandler. She nodded once. Mariana. The name settled between them easily, without ceremony. A small lull followed, not awkward, just unhurried. The cafe continued its quiet rhythm around them. Cups clinked. The door opened and closed. The jazz track shifted to something slower. Mariana glanced at his notes, then back at him. You look like someone who carries too much in his head, she said. It's written all over your face. Chandler almost bristled, then realized she wasn't judging him, only observing. I don't trust things I can't control, he admitted, more honestly than he intended. Mariana studied him a moment longer. Then you must be exhausted, she replied gently. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took another sip of coffee, feeling the warmth steady him again. For the first time in days, the pressure inside his chest eased just enough to let him breathe without forcing it. Across from him, Mariana straightened. I have to get back to work, she said, but if you're still here when my shift ends, I'll sit with you for a few minutes. You look like you could use company that doesn't want anything from you. She didn't wait for his reply before walking away. Chandler watched her go, not with attraction, but with quiet curiosity. For the first time in a long while, someone had seen him not as potential, not as a future success, not as a mind to be exploited, but simply as a person who looked like he needed to breathe. He turned back to his screen. His code was still there, his deadlines were still there, his problems were still there, but now so was the cup of coffee, and the unexpected possibility that he might not have to carry everything alone. The sky had softened by the time Mariana's shift ended. Not bright, not dark, a quiet in-between where the last traces of daylight lingered in thin bands of gold above the Hudson. The river moved steadily, carrying small ripples that caught the fading light and scattered it in delicate flashes. Chandler was still there. Laptop closed now. Books stacked neatly. The cup of coffee long finished but still resting in his hands as if he had forgotten to set it down. When Mariana stepped outside, she spotted him immediately, leaning against the iron railing that bordered the walkway, jacket folded over his arm, gaze fixed on the water. He looked less wound up, less tense, as though the air itself had slowed his thoughts. She joined him without announcing herself, resting her forearms on the cool metal beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Boats glided past in the distance, their engines humming softly. Laughter drifted from a nearby group of friends. Somewhere behind them, a cyclist's bell chimed once before fading away. Finally, Mariana broke the silence, not looking at him. You work like you're running from something. Chandler exhaled slowly, watching a barge cut cleanly across the river. I work like I'm trying to stay ahead of being left behind, he said. She turned her head just enough to study his profile. Sharp, serious, tired in ways that ran deeper than sleep. Those aren't the same things, she replied. He let that sit between them. A gentle breeze lifted strands of her hair, brushing against her cheek. She didn't move them away. Chandler noticed, then quickly looked back toward the water, almost embarrassed by how small the detail felt, and how much it stayed with him. After a beat, she spoke again, quieter this time. What do you want when you're not proving anything? He frowned slightly, the question landing somewhere unguarded. He searched for an answer, not a pitch, not a polished statement, not something meant to impress, just the truth. I want to build something that actually matters, he said finally. Something that protects people who can't protect themselves. Something that lasts beyond me. Mariana listened without interrupting. And you? He asked, glancing at her. She leaned forward, resting her chin lightly in her hand. I want to live gently in a loud world, she said. To take care of my sister, to read good books, to remember why I started, even when things get hard. A small pause. Then, almost to herself, she added, Success doesn't scare me. Losing myself does. Chandler absorbed that quietly. The river kept moving. The lights along the far shore began to appear, tiny pinpricks against the deepening blue of the evening. Do you know what worries me about people like you? She asked softly. He turned toward her. What? She met his gaze calmly. You get so focused on becoming someone impressive that you forget who you already are. The words did not strike him like a blow. They settled instead, steady and undeniable. He looked back at the water, then at the skyline rising behind them, then at her. "I don't want to forget," he said after a moment. Her lips curved slightly. "Then don't—" Silence returned, but this time it felt different. Shared, not isolating. A small boat passed beneath the glow of a distant bridge. Somewhere music drifted faintly from a street performer. The city continued around them, but for a few minutes neither of them belonged to it. Chandler felt, for the first time in a long while, less like a man trying to outrun his past, and more like someone simply standing beside another person. As the last light slipped below the horizon, Mariana leaned her head lightly toward his shoulder, not touching him, just close enough that he could sense her presence. He did not move away, and in that quiet moment by the river, something quiet but significant took root between them, not dramatic, not performative, just real. The night deepened slowly. The river darkened to ink, broken only by scattered reflections of the city lights. The skyline behind them glowed in clean vertical lines, tall, orderly, and distant. Somewhere across the water, a faint horn sounded, low and steady, then faded. Mariana straightened, breaking the stillness between them. She turned toward Chandler, not with urgency, but with a calm seriousness that made him look at her fully. "You know," she said quietly, "I've met a lot of people who want to change the world." He tilted his head slightly. And most of them are so focused on the world that they forget themselves in the process." Her voice carried no judgment, only clarity. Chandler watched the water before answering. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" Mariana considered him for a moment, then shook her head just enough to be noticeable. "I think you're close to it," she said, "but you're not there yet." He exhaled, almost relieved. She rested her forearms again on the railing, gaze steady on the horizon. "You're brilliant," she continued. "But brilliance can become a trap if you let it define you completely. People start treating you like a symbol. You start treating yourself like one." Chandler didn't speak. He listened. Mariana turned back to him. "I don't need you to be extraordinary," she said gently. "I need you to stay human." A beat passed. Then, softer, "Promise me something." Her lips curved faintly, but her tone remained serious. Not a dramatic one, just a small one. He studied her face, steady, thoughtful, unpretentious, and nodded. She took a slow breath. "When things get loud, when the money, the attention, the expectations start piling up, don't let them drown out the part of you that sits quietly in a cafe and forgets to eat." Chandler's gaze flickered, surprised. She didn't stop there. "Remember the version of you who cares about broken systems because real people get hurt. Remember the kid who noticed what others ignored. Remember why you started, not just what you're trying to build." Her words settled into him, not like advice, but like something he already knew, and had simply misplaced. He looked back at the river, then at the city, then finally at her. "And if I forget?" he asked quietly. Mariana met his eyes without hesitation. "Then I'll remind you." A small, unguarded breath left him. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, just something honest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night wrapped around them gently. The river moved. The city breathed. Life continued at its steady pace. Chandler shifted slightly closer, close enough now that the space between them felt deliberate. "I've never had anyone ask me to remember who I am," he admitted. Mariana didn't look away. "Most people ask you to become something," she said. "I'm asking you not to lose yourself in it." He let that sit. Then, quietly, "I think I needed to hear that." She gave a small nod, satisfied not by being right, but by being understood. They stood there a little longer, not talking, not performing, not pretending, simply existing side by side, grounded by the river beneath them and the city beyond it. In that unremarkable, deeply human moment, Chandler felt something he hadn't felt in years, not pressure, not urgency, just presence. The lights along the river had fully awakened now, stretching in long, steady lines that mirrored themselves across the water. A faint chill moved through the air, the kind that signals the night has settled in for good. Somewhere behind them, the last of the cafe's customers filtered out, the door chiming softly before closing again. Mariana shifted slightly, breaking the quiet between them. "I should head home," she said, not in a rush, just with the natural pull of responsibility. "My sister will wonder if I've disappeared." Chandler straightened as well, reluctant in a way he didn't quite recognize. "Of course," he replied. They faced each other properly now, the river at their backs, the city humming faintly around them. For a second neither spoke. The moment hovered, not awkward, just careful, like both of them sensed that something meaningful had formed without either of them planning it. Mariana studied him, her expression gentle but steady. "You'll be fine tonight," she said. "You look less trapped in your own head." A corner of his mouth lifted before he could stop it. "That's your coffee," he said. She tilted her head, and maybe a little of my stubborn honesty. He nodded slowly, then grew more serious. Thank you, he added, quieter now, not just for the coffee. She didn't ask what he meant. She seemed to understand. A small beat passed. Then, almost casually, though the words carried weight, she said, "Remember what we talked about?" He met her gaze. "I will." She didn't demand proof. She didn't make it dramatic. She simply accepted his answer. Mariana turned to leave, taking a few steps toward the path that curved along the river. Halfway there she paused, glancing back once more. "If you get lost in all of this one day," she said, gesturing faintly toward the skyline, "don't pretend you were always meant to." Chandler watched her for a long moment. "I won't," he said. She gave a small nod, not quite a smile, not quite farewell, then continued walking, her figure growing smaller against the glowing city behind her. Chandler remained where he was. The river moved steadily before him. The bridge lights shimmered. The distant hum of Manhattan rolled across the water like a slow, constant breath. He turned back toward the skyline, but something inside him had shifted. The buildings no longer felt like a challenge to conquer or a mountain to climb. They felt like a responsibility, something that required clarity, restraint, and above all, memory. He thought of the flickering lamp in Queens. He thought of the empty space where his father should have been. He thought of the relentless pace that had driven him for years. And then he thought of Mariana, calm, perceptive, unafraid to speak plainly, unafraid to see him as more than potential or prestige. Slowly, Chandler walked a few steps along the railing, letting the night air fill his lungs. He did not make grand resolutions. He did not swear to change overnight. He simply held one steady idea in his mind, not flashy, not complicated, just enduring. When the world grows too bright, when success becomes blinding, when expectations become deafening, he would remember the man who sat in a quiet cafe with too many empty cups, and the woman who asked him to stay human. The city glittered. The river carried on, and beneath all of it, Chandler carried that quiet promise with him, not as a vow spoken aloud, but as something lived, slowly, over time. Glover Innovations did not grow. It surged. What had begun as a cramped office with mismatched chairs, humming servers, and whiteboards crowded with half-erased equations quickly became something far larger than Chandler had ever imagined. First came a sleek headquarters in Lower Manhattan, glass, steel, and open workspaces filled with young engineers who spoke in algorithms and slept beneath their desks. Then satellite offices appeared in Boston, San Francisco, London, and Singapore, each carrying the same minimalist design and relentless pace. Contracts multiplied. City governments sought his systems to modernize transit networks. Financial institutions relied on his security platforms. Telecommunications companies integrated his technology into their global infrastructure. Every quarter brought bigger numbers, bolder headlines, and a longer list of partners who wanted his name attached to their projects. Chandler moved through it all with surgical precision. Days blurred into nights. Meetings bled into presentations. Flights became routine, time zones irrelevant, sleep optional. His calendar was a mosaic of back-to-back commitments, strategy calls at dawn, negotiations at noon, keynote speeches by evening. Board members spoke of him in hushed admiration. Investors treated his word like certainty. Competitors studied his moves as if they were chess strategies. Inside the company, his presence commanded quiet respect. When he walked the floor, conversations paused, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the mind behind the machines shaping their world. Yet amid this expansion, Chandler rarely slowed. He no longer lingered over sketches or debated ideas late into the night like he once did. Decisions were faster now, cleaner, colder, more efficient. The company demanded momentum, and he supplied it without hesitation. Mariana watched this rise from the edge of his life, never trying to stand in its way. She visited the new headquarters only once, standing quietly in the lobby while executives hurried past her without noticing. She saw how people looked at him, as a figure, a brand, a force, not as the man she had met in a small corner cafe. That version of Chandler was still there, but each success seemed to pull him a little farther from her reach. Glover Innovations was no longer just his creation. It had become a machine, and Chandler was now both its architect and its engine, moving too fast to feel the shift happening inside him. At first, Mariana adjusted without complaint. She moved into a modest apartment with Chandler near his office, bright, simple, and intentionally unpretentious. The walls held no corporate awards, only shelves of her books, a few framed photographs, and a small vase that always held fresh flowers from the corner shop. While his world accelerated, she kept their home steady. She learned his rhythms without him having to explain them. On nights he returned past midnight, she left a warm meal covered on the stove and a note beside his laptop. Eat something. You're still human. In the mornings, she brewed coffee before he woke, setting his cup exactly where he would reach for it. Sometimes she sat quietly on the couch with a book while he worked at the dining table, the only sound the tap of his keyboard and the slow turn of her pages. Other nights, she walked with him along the river to help him clear his head, never pushing, never interrogating, just being present. But Chandler began to drift. Not suddenly, not cruelly, just gradually. Dinners were rescheduled, then forgotten. Calls went unanswered until hours later. Promises to leave early dissolved into 3 a.m. arrivals. When he came home, his body was there, but his mind lingered in boardrooms and strategy sessions. Mariana noticed the small changes first. He stopped asking how her day had been. He no longer sat beside her when she read. He moved through their apartment like a visitor, not a partner. She adapted quietly, as she always did, cooking less for two, keeping her voice gentle, giving him room. Yet the space between them widened in ways neither of them named. There were moments when she tried to reach him. Once, she placed a hand over his while he was working, not to stop him, just to anchor him. He flinched almost imperceptibly before relaxing, eyes still fixed on his screen. Another night, she waited up for him, sitting at the kitchen table with a single lamp glowing overhead. When he finally came in, exhausted and distant, she asked softly, "Are you still here with me?" He paused in the doorway, jacket half off. "I'm just tired," he said, not unkindly, but not fully present either. She accepted the answer, though it did not satisfy her. Around them, the city kept moving, the company kept expanding, and Chandler kept rising, while the emotional distance inside their home quietly solidified. Mariana did not fight him, but she began to feel, for the first time, that she was standing beside a man who was slowly learning how to live without needing her. The circles Chandler moved in changed before he did. Private dinners replaced quiet nights. Invitations came from people who spoke in measured sentences and carried themselves like walking balance sheets. They addressed him as Mr. Glover even when they laughed, as if his name were both title and currency. Mariana accompanied him at first. She dressed simply, spoke thoughtfully, and listened more than she talked. Some people warmed to her immediately, drawn to her calm, her directness, her lack of pretense. Others looked past her, eyes sliding toward the room's power players as if she were part of the decor. Chandler noticed both reactions, even if he pretended not to. In polished lounges and glass-walled offices, conversations began to shift when Mariana stepped away to use the restroom or greet someone she knew. A financier smiled too smoothly over his wine. A board member lowered his voice just enough to be discreet. A venture partner chose his words with deliberate care. "She's lovely," one of them said once, as if weighing a delicate object. Another tilted his head. "Chandler's life is becoming very visible. Visibility requires alignment." Someone else laughed lightly, not unkindly, but casually dismissive. People expect a certain kind of partner at his level. The phrases were polite, polished, and precise, yet they carried a clear subtext. She doesn't look like what success is supposed to look like. No one said this to Mariana's face. No one raised their voice. The comments floated around Chandler like low, constant static, easy to ignore at first, harder to dismiss over time. At a gala one evening, a well-known publicist approached him after Mariana stepped aside to speak with an old friend. "Your story is extraordinary," she said, smiling up at him. "But stories need a frame. Right now, yours feels unfinished." Chandler offered a non-committal nod. Later that night, in the elevator, he glanced at Mariana's reflection in the mirrored walls, composed, present, entirely herself. For a brief second, something tightened behind his ribs. He told himself the whispers meant nothing. He told himself he did not care about appearances. Yet, when another executive casually suggested that a high-profile partner could make negotiations smoother, the idea did not disappear as easily as he wanted it to. Mariana sensed the shift long before he acknowledged it. She watched the way people spoke to him, and the way he began to respond. She noticed how he straightened slightly more in public, how his smile grew controlled, how his answers became polished rather than honest. The world around him was slowly reshaping him, not through force but through expectation. And in that quiet, almost invisible pressure, the first real crack in their relationship formed, not from anger, but from the subtle, steady pull of a life that was beginning to demand something different from the man she loved. Rain struck the windows in thin, relentless lines, blurring the city into trembling streaks of light. Thunder rolled somewhere above Manhattan, low and distant at first, then closer, a slow, unsettled rumble that made the glass shiver in its frames. Inside the apartment, the only illumination came from a single floor lamp beside the couch, its glow soft but unsteady against the walls. Chandler sat at the dining table, laptop open, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on his screen. Documents were spread in front of him, projections, proposals, terms, clauses. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, still deliberate, carrying the weight of decisions that would shape his company's next decade. Mariana moved quietly through the room. She placed a glass of water beside him, then retreated without speaking. The kitchen was neat, the counters wiped clean, the air faintly scented with lemon from the dish soap. Everything looked normal. Nothing felt that way. A flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the apartment in a cold, brief brightness. Chandler didn't look up. Mariana stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, not accusing, not pleading, just observing. The man she loved was physically there, yet farther from her than he had been when they first met across a small cafe table. Finally, she walked toward the couch and sat down beside him, close enough that he would have to feel her presence. The rain intensified, drumming harder against the windows. She waited. When he didn't move, she spoke, softly, carefully, as if handling something fragile. "Do you still see me?" His hands stilled mid-air. He didn't turn immediately. The question seemed to hover between them, heavier than the storm outside. After a beat, he glanced at her, but not fully, not the way he used to. His gaze skimmed her face like someone searching for an answer in the wrong place. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice controlled. Mariana folded her hands in her lap, steady, composed, unshaken. "I mean," she said quietly, "when you look at me now, do you see me, or do you only see what you're becoming?" Lightning flashed again, sharper this time, carving harsh lines across the room. For an instant, his face was stark, exposed, almost unfamiliar. Chandler swallowed. He opened his mouth, then stopped. The room filled with a silence that felt thicker than the storm. Rain hammered the windows. Thunder cracked overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint but insistent. Mariana watched him closely. She didn't rush him. She didn't soften the question. She didn't rescue him from it. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked back to the laptop, then away again, caught between worlds, the life he was building and the woman sitting inches from him. He began, then nothing. The word dissolved before it fully formed. He exhaled through his nose, slow and measured, the way he did in boardrooms when he needed to regain control. But this was not a negotiation. There was no strategy that could tidy this moment. Mariana's expression didn't change, no anger, no desperation, just a quiet, unwavering presence that made his hesitation feel louder than any argument. The storm roared. His silence stretched, longer than a pause, longer than uncertainty, long enough to become its own answer. Her shoulders didn't slump, her gaze didn't drop. She simply absorbed it, all of it, without dramatics, without theatrics, without accusation. Finally, she spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "That's what I needed to know." Chandler looked at her then, truly looked, and for a fleeting second, something like panic flickered behind his eyes. But it arrived too late, buried beneath layers of discipline, caution, and ambition. He turned back to his screen. The rain kept falling. Mariana remained seated beside him, still, steady, painfully calm. Between them, the space felt wider than any physical distance, not because of anger, but because of the truth he had failed to confront. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic exit, just a storm outside, and a silence inside that carried more weight than any argument ever could. The call came after midnight. Chandler stood in his office at Glover Innovations, lights low, city stretched out beyond the glass like a field of disciplined brightness. The floor was quiet now. Most of his team had gone home hours earlier. Only a faint hum from the building systems remained, steady and impersonal. His phone rested against his ear. On the other end was a consortium that did not bother with small talk. Their representatives spoke in measured tones, confident, unhurried, certain of their influence. They did not threaten him. They did not need to. They outlined a future. Global expansion on a scale he had only sketched in late-night drafts. Access to governments, infrastructure contracts, and financial backing that could make Glover Innovations untouchable. His technology embedded in cities across continents, his name woven into systems that would outlast him. The kind of power most founders never even came close to touching. Chandler listened in silence. He walked slowly toward the window as they spoke, eyes moving across the skyline he already dominated. In his reflection, he looked composed, the same man investors trusted, boardrooms respected, and competitors studied. Then the condition arrived. Not dramatic, not cruel, simply precise. If he wanted this deal, his life had to look a certain way. No complicated attachments, no visible vulnerabilities, no personal narratives that could be framed as distractions or liabilities, no relationship that could be spun into weakness by rivals or the press. In their words, he needed to appear unencumbered, married only to his work, fully aligned with the machine he had built. They spoke as if they were describing a technical requirement, not a human one. Chandler stopped moving. The city lights shimmered against the glass, steady and indifferent. His reflection hovered over them, powerful, isolated, unmistakable. He did not argue. He did not react. He simply absorbed. When the call ended, the office felt unnaturally quiet, as though the air itself were holding its breath. Chandler lowered the phone and stood there for a long moment, the weight of the choice pressing in from all sides. Not loud, not chaotic, just inescapable. Outside, Manhattan continued without hesitation. Inside him, something shifted, not yet breaking, but bending. Most windows in the neighboring buildings were dark now, a scattering of lights remaining like stubborn stars. The elevator hummed upward with slow, mechanical patience, its mirrored walls reflecting his face from different angles, calm, unreadable, polished. When the doors opened, the apartment was softly lit. Mariana sat at the dining table, a book open before her, though she clearly hadn't been reading. A single lamp glowed overhead, its light pooling gently across the wood. 2 cups of tea rested on the table untouched. She looked up as he stepped inside, not with accusation, not with relief, just quiet attention. Chandler removed his jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. His movements were controlled, almost careful, as though he were moving through a space that had suddenly become fragile. "Late night?" she asked, voice steady. "Long one," he replied. He sat across from her, his chair making a faint scrape against the floor. For a moment, neither spoke. The ticking of the clock on the wall filled the space between them, precise, unhurried, impossible to ignore. Mariana folded a corner of her page and closed the book. "You look different," she said softly. He met her gaze. Different? How? She studied him, not searching for weakness, but trying to understand. "Like your mind is somewhere very far away," she said, "and you're deciding something that doesn't include this room." Chandler exhaled slowly. He considered deflecting. He considered summarizing. He considered turning it into business language that felt safer. Instead, he chose honesty. Not complete, but real. "They made an offer," he said. Her expression did not change. "Investors?" He nodded. Mariana wrapped her hands around her teacup, feeling its warmth, though she did not drink. "It's everything," he admitted. "Global scale, influence, the kind of backing that makes failure almost impossible." Silence settled again, gentler this time. She leaned back slightly in her chair, watching him with a clarity that made him feel both seen and unsettled. "What's the cost?" she asked quietly. Chandler's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They want my life to look uncomplicated," he said carefully. "No visible entanglements, no personal distractions. A clean narrative." Her fingers stilled around the cup. "A clean narrative," she repeated softly, tasting the words. He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had stood beside him before headlines, before power, before people treated his name like a title. Mariana did not raise her voice. She did not scoff. She did not demand. She simply leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table between them, her tone steady, grounded, unmistakable. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said. The sentence landed with quiet force, not dramatic, not pleading, just clear. Chandler swallowed. For a moment, the image of his empty penthouse window flickered through his mind. The city beneath him, distant and controlled, yet isolating. And he saw her sitting across from him now, real, present, unwavering. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mariana watched him carefully, giving him space to think, to speak, to choose. "I know," he said finally. His voice was low, controlled, but something underneath it trembled. She didn't soften. She didn't push. She simply stayed where she was, her gaze steady, her presence undeniable. "You don't have to be everything to everyone," she continued quietly. "You don't have to prove your worth by standing alone at the top." Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, a low murmur against the glass, though no storm followed it. Chandler looked down at his hands. They were the hands that had built a company from nothing, steady, capable, unrelenting. Yet in this moment, they felt suddenly uncertain, caught between 2 lives pulling in opposite directions. Mariana spoke again, not louder, just clearer. "I love what you're building," she said. "I believe in your mind, your drive, your vision, but I won't disappear so your image looks better." He lifted his eyes to hers. There was no threat there, no ultimatum, only self-respect. A long beat passed. Outside, a car horn sounded faintly, then faded. Somewhere, a door closed in another apartment. Life continued around them, indifferent to the decision forming in the space between 2 people. Chandler straightened slightly in his chair. He thought of the consortium's voices, precise, confident, certain. He thought of the skyline that had come to define him. He thought of the belief that power meant safety, control meant protection. Then he looked at Mariana, calm, steady, unmovable in her truth. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a choice already made. "They're offering something I might never see again," he said quietly. "I know. Neither of them pretended this was simple. Neither of them dressed it up. The room held its breath. Chandler's gaze hardened, not in cruelty but in resolve, the kind that had carried him from Queens to the top of Manhattan. Mariana saw it the instant it settled, and in that instant she understood, not with shock, not with anger, but with painful clarity. He had chosen, not yet spoken, but chosen. She straightened, folding her hands neatly in her lap. No tears, no trembling, no dramatics, just quiet acceptance of a truth that had been forming long before tonight. The clock on the wall kept moving. Its steady rhythm felt louder now, as if each second carried more weight than the last. The lamp above the table cast a soft circle of light around them, leaving the edges of the room in shadow. Chandler sat perfectly still. His shoulders were straight, his expression composed. The same focus that had carried him through countless negotiations now settled firmly into place. Mariana watched him, not with desperation, but with quiet clarity, the kind that comes from seeing someone exactly as they are, not as you wish them to be. He spoke at last. Not quickly, not dramatically, deliberately. "I can't walk away from this." The words were calm, final, polished like everything else in his life. Mariana did not flinch. She did not argue. She did not ask him to repeat himself. She simply absorbed it, her hands resting lightly on the table, her posture unchanged. Chandler continued, voice controlled, almost businesslike, the tone he used when a decision was already sealed. "This deal changes everything, for the company, for the cities we'll build, for the systems we'll create. If I hesitate now, I might never get another chance like this." He met her gaze then, searching, not for permission but for understanding. Mariana nodded once, slowly. "I hear you," she said quietly. A small pause stretched between them, not filled with anger, but with something heavier, the quiet fracture of a future they had once imagined together. Chandler leaned forward slightly, his composure cracking just enough to reveal what lay beneath. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said. Her lips pressed together, not in bitterness, but in acceptance. Wanting rarely changes outcomes, she replied evenly. She pushed her chair back and stood, no rushing, no trembling, just measured movement, like someone stepping carefully out of a life they once believed in. Chandler rose halfway, then stopped, unsure whether to reach for her. Mariana walked toward their bedroom without looking back. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that seems to deepen when something permanent is happening. Moments later, she returned carrying a small bag, already packed, her coat draped over her arm. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just practical, prepared, and painfully certain. Chandler watched her, a tightness settling behind his ribs. "Mariana," he said softly. She paused near the door, finally turning to face him fully. Her expression was calm, steady, unbroken, the same strength that had first drawn him to her in a small corner cafe. "I won't ask you to choose differently," she said. "That would mean asking you to become someone you are not." A beat. Then, with quiet precision, "But don't pretend this is inevitable. You are not being pushed. You are choosing." The truth landed cleanly between them. Chandler swallowed. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, eyes meeting his one last time. "Maybe one day you'll look back and realize what this cost you," she continued, voice soft but unwavering. "Or maybe you won't. Either way, that will be yours to carry." Her hand moved to the door handle. For a split second, something flickered across Chandler's face, hesitation, regret, a flicker of the boy who once stood under a trembling lamp. Then control returned. Mariana opened the door. The hallway beyond was dim and ordinary, completely indifferent to the life-changing behind her. She stepped through without looking back. The door closed with a quiet, definite click. Not a slam, not a scene, just final. Chandler remained standing in the living room, alone beneath the warm lamp, the echo of her absence settling into every corner of the apartment. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened. Lights steady, traffic moving, life unfolding without hesitation. Inside, the choice solidified. He had kept his path. He had lost his person. If you're watching this and feeling that pull between ambition and love, pause for a moment and tell me in the comments, would you choose love or power? She did not disappear with noise. No tearful airport scene, no dramatic train platform, no late-night sprint through crowded streets. Mariana left New York the way she lived in it, quietly, deliberately, and with her dignity intact. The morning after she walked out, the city behaved as if nothing had changed. Traffic rolled through Manhattan in its usual disciplined rhythm. Coffee shops opened. Office lights flickered on. Elevators carried people upward toward meetings that felt urgent but rarely were. In the apartment she and Chandler once shared, everything looked the same. The table was still set for two, Her books still lined the shelves. Her mug still sat in its usual place. Only her clothes were gone. Not all of them, just enough. A small suitcase. A few boxes shipped ahead of time. No note left on the counter. No message taped to the door. No explanation framed for anyone to find. Mariana had never needed theatrics to make her point. Chandler noticed first in the smallest ways. The quiet felt different when he came home. Not peaceful, not heavy, simply hollow in places where warmth used to sit. The lamp over the dining table glowed the same, but the chair across from him stayed empty. The apartment echoed faintly when he spoke. He checked his phone out of habit. No missed calls. No messages. He stood in the living room longer than necessary, eyes drifting toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. He did not walk down it. He already knew what he would find. The city did not slow for his realization. By afternoon, Mariana's name vanished from their building's directory. Her mail was forwarded. Her key fob was deactivated. The practical details of her absence moved through bureaucratic systems without emotion or hesitation. Friends reached out to Chandler, careful with their words. "Have you heard from her? Is everything okay? We didn't see her at the cafe anymore." He answered them the same way he answered investors. Controlled, composed, minimal. She needed space, he said. No one pushed further. Meanwhile, Mariana moved through the city with purposeful calm. She stopped by the bookstore near the cafe where they first met, returning the keys she had used for years. She hugged the owner briefly, whispered something too low for anyone else to hear, and left with a single box of her favorite paperbacks tucked under her arm. At the cafe, she did not linger. She ordered one last coffee to go, accepted it with a small nod, and stepped back onto the sidewalk. For a moment, she paused outside the door, eyes drifting toward the corner table where Chandler once sat buried beneath textbooks and empty cups. Her expression did not soften. She turned and walked away. By evening, she boarded a northbound train with a small bag at her feet and the city sliding past the window in long, luminous streaks. Manhattan receded slowly, skyscrapers giving way to narrower streets, then to open sky and dark stretches of land. Mariana did not look back, not in anger, not in sadness, simply in clarity. She had not vanished out of spite. She had chosen distance the way some people choose silence, because it was the only space where she could breathe without pretending. By nightfall, New York had swallowed her absence completely. Chandler remained in the apartment beneath the steady glow of the lamp, staring at a skyline he no longer shared with anyone who truly knew him. And somewhere on a quiet train moving north, Mariana carried her future, unseen, unannounced, and irrevocably changed, away from the city that had once promised them everything. Upstate mornings arrived differently. They came without sirens, without horns, without the constant electric hum of Manhattan. Light filtered through tall trees in clean, narrow beams, landing softly on small houses with sloped roofs and front porches that held empty rocking chairs. Mariana rented a modest room in a white house on a quiet street that curved gently toward a lake. The owner, an elderly woman who spoke little and noticed everything, asked no questions, only showed Mariana where to place her suitcase and where the sun hit the floor in the early hours. For a few days, Mariana did nothing but rest. She walked slowly along empty sidewalks. She drank coffee on the porch in the early light. She sat by the window in the evenings watching shadows stretch across the lawn. Then one afternoon she noticed something subtle but persistent. Her body felt different, not dramatic, not alarming, just unfamiliar in small ways, a lingering fatigue, a faint nausea that arrived without warning, a steady sensation she could not quite name. She went to a small clinic on the edge of town, the kind with faded posters on the walls and a receptionist who knew everyone by first name. Mariana sat in a narrow chair beneath fluorescent lights that hummed quietly overhead, hands folded in her lap, expression composed. The nurse returned after a few minutes, her tone professional but gentle. Mariana listened. She did not gasp, she did not collapse, she did not cry. She simply sat very still. Outside, a car passed slowly. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang once, then stopped. The world continued with ordinary patience. When Mariana finally stood, her movements were steady, almost deliberate. She thanked the nurse, signed the necessary papers, and stepped back into the sunlight. The air felt sharper than before. She walked a few blocks before stopping beside a small park where children were laughing on swings. She sat on a wooden bench beneath a maple tree and rested her hands lightly against her stomach, not protectively, not possessively, just thoughtfully. 2 lives, not one. The realization settled over her with quiet clarity, not as a burden, but as an undeniable shift in direction. She thought of Chandler, not in anger, not in longing, simply in acknowledgement. The future she had once imagined with him no longer existed in the same shape, but another future was already forming without his knowledge. Mariana did not call him. She did not write. She did not second-guess her decision. Instead, she inhaled slowly, feeling the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat beneath her palms, and made a choice just as clear as the one that had led her to leave New York. She would move forward, alone, but not lonely, responsible, but not afraid, strong, not for spite, but for what was now growing inside her. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the quiet street in warm gold, Mariana walked back toward her temporary room, already thinking about what kind of life she would build here. Not flashy, not loud, not designed for anyone else's approval. A life steady enough to carry two small, unseen futures toward the world, and for the first time since leaving Manhattan, her steps did not feel like retreat. They felt like arrival. The town welcomed her without ceremony, not with fanfare, not with curiosity, just with the slow, steady rhythm of a place that had seen many people arrive and many people leave. Its main street stretched only a few blocks, small grocery, family diner, post office, and a single bookstore with a weathered wooden sign that read Willow and Page. Mariana noticed it on her second morning. The shop sat at the corner where the street curved toward the lake. Tall windows displayed neatly stacked paperbacks, old leather-bound volumes, and a small vase of fresh flowers that changed every few days. A bell chimed softly when the door opened, and the air inside carried the comforting scent of paper and polished wood. She stepped in almost without thinking. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter, reading glasses. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter, reading glasses perched low on her nose. "Take your time," she said simply. Mariana wandered the narrow aisles, fingers grazing spines she recognized and others she did not. Sunlight filtered through the front windows, dust drifting lazily in its beams. Somewhere in the back, a kettle whistled faintly, then went silent. When Mariana reached the counter, she found a small handwritten sign: help wanted, part-time. Love of books required, small talk optional. She glanced up. The woman watched her with quiet attention. Mariana hesitated only a second before speaking. "Is this still available?" A faint smile touched the woman's lips. "Depends. Do you actually like books, or do you just look like you do?" Mariana considered the question seriously. "I like stories that don't pretend life is simple," she said. The woman studied her for a beat, then slid a pen across the counter. By the end of the week, Mariana had a job. Her days settled into a gentle pattern. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, the lake glimmering faintly through the trees. She walked to the bookstore along quiet sidewalks where neighbors nodded politely but did not pry. Inside Willow and Page, she organized shelves, recommended novels to hesitant customers, and wrapped fragile first editions with careful hands. She learned names slowly, not because she was distant, but because she preferred knowing people properly. Mrs. Calderon, who bought historical fiction every Tuesday. Eli, a quiet teenager who lingered near the poetry section. Mr. Harris, who asked for the same newspaper every morning even though he already knew its contents. The bookstore became her anchor. In the afternoons, she shelved new arrivals near the front window, letting sunlight warm her face. In the evenings, she closed up shop, counted the register, and walked home beneath skies that grew steadily darker but never felt threatening. Her small room transformed gradually into a home. She added a soft lamp beside the bed, hung a single-framed photograph on the wall, and placed a small plant on the windowsill that leaned instinctively toward the light. On weekends, she wandered along the lake, listening to water lap quietly against the shore, breathing in air that felt lighter than anything she had known in Manhattan. Life did not move fast here, and for the first time in years, Mariana did not feel compelled to keep up with anything. She worked, she rested, she planned quietly for a future she did not yet fully see but already trusted. Sometimes, in the stillness of early morning, she rested her hands against her stomach and felt the faintest awareness of the two lives growing within her, not dramatic, not sentimental, simply steady and real. She did not mourn what she had left behind. She did not romanticize it either. New York remained exactly where she had placed it, a chapter closed, not erased. Upstate, in a quiet town with a small bookstore and a lake that mirrored the sky, Mariana began to build something different, a life grounded in patience, a life shaped by her own choices, a life spacious enough to hold two small futures she would soon bring into the world. And as weeks turned into months, Willow and Page, with its creaking floors, warm lights, and slow bell at the door, became more than a workplace. It became the place where her new story quietly took root. Time in the small town did not rush. It accumulated quietly. Seasons rolled over one another with gentle certainty. Spring softened the lake's edges, summer filled the bookstore with sunlight, autumn painted the trees in deep color, and winter wrapped everything in patient silence. When the twins arrived, they did not arrive with spectacle. They came on an ordinary morning, beneath a steady sky, into a room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and clean linen. Mariana held them with steady hands, breathing slow, her expression composed but luminous. Two children, two separate cries, two distinct presences from the very beginning. She named them with intention, not ornament. Jessie came first. She was calm in a way that felt almost deliberate, observant even as an infant, quiet when others might fuss, steady when the world shifted around her. Her eyes carried an unusual attentiveness, as if she were always reading more than what appeared on the surface. As she grew, Jessie preferred books to noise, patterns to chaos, and solitude to crowds. She listened before speaking, watched before acting, and remembered small details most people overlooked, the way light moved across a room, the tone in someone's voice, the pause before a difficult truth. She felt deeply, but expressed it with care. Her empathy did not announce itself. It revealed itself in small gestures, placing a blanket over a sleeping child in the bookstore, returning a lost bookmark to its exact page, noticing when Mariana's smile did not quite reach her eyes. Gibson arrived moments later. From his first breath, he carried a different energy, curious, restless, intelligent in a way that seemed to spark outward. His eyes moved constantly, taking in everything, testing boundaries, asking silent questions about how things worked. As a toddler, he dismantled toys only to rebuild them in unexpected ways. As a child, he filled notebooks with sketches of machines, bridges, and strange devices that looked both imaginative and strangely practical. He spoke quickly, thought faster, and challenged ideas not out of defiance, but out of fascination. Where Jessie observed, Gibson experimented. Where Jessie waited, Gibson acted. Yet beneath his boldness lived a quiet sensitivity he rarely showed. He noticed when people were hurting, and though he did not always know how to comfort them, he felt the pull to try. From the start, one truth was impossible to ignore. In their expressions, their posture, even the way they tilted their heads when thinking, Jessie and Gibson carried something unmistakable. Strangers occasionally paused in the bookstore, glancing twice, unable to explain why the twins felt familiar. Mariana noticed it every day. Same dark eyes, same thoughtful intensity, same quiet seriousness beneath their differences. She never said his name, not in anger, not in secrecy, simply in choice. As they grew older, questions came, gently at first, then with more weight. "Where is our father?" Jessie asked one evening, while arranging books by color on the lower shelf. Gibson looked up from the small circuit he was building on the floor. Mariana closed the cash register, turned slowly, and met them where they stood. Not above them, not below them, just level. She did not invent a story. She did not vilify. She did not soften the truth into something comfortable. Her voice remained steady. "Your father was someone who forgot himself before he could remember you." The sentence hung in the air, simple, precise, unforgettable. Jessie absorbed it in silence, fingers resting lightly on a spine of a book. Gibson tilted his head, thinking, processing, filing the words away like a problem he would return to later. Mariana did not elaborate. She did not explain the past in detail. She did not turn the moment into a lesson. She simply stood with them in the truth she had offered. Outside, the lake moved quietly. Inside Willow and Page, the bell chimed as a customer entered. Life continued around them without drama. That line stayed with the twins, not as resentment, not as pity, as clarity. It shaped how they saw the world, how they understood responsibility, memory, and choice long before they fully grasped their own origins. Jessie carried it like a quiet compass. Gibson carried it like a question he would one day test, and Mariana carried them both, steady, unshaken, certain of the life she had chosen to build. Two children, two futures. One mother who refused to pretend that love and power could always share the same path. The bookstore became the center of their small universe. On weekdays, Jessie sat at the low table near the children's section, sketching quietly while Mariana sorted new arrivals. Gibson sprawled on the floor with loose wires, paper diagrams, and whatever broken clock or radio someone had donated to Willow and Page. Customers grew accustomed to them. Some asked polite questions. Most did not. In a town like this, children simply existed in shared spaces without being treated like curiosities. Mariana moved through her days with the same calm steadiness she had carried out of Manhattan. She worked. She cooked simple meals. She read aloud at night, her voice low and even, pausing only when Jessie or Gibson interrupted with a thought that could not wait. In those quiet routines, something strong took shape. Not flashy, not fragile, simply enduring. Yet there were moments when the past surfaced without invitation. Sometimes, when Jessie stared out the bookstore window toward the lake, Mariana saw the same still intensity she had once watched in Chandler's eyes. Other times, when Gibson leaned over a complicated sketch, biting his lip in concentration, she recognized the familiar curve of his focus. Strangers noticed too. A traveler once paused mid-conversation, studying the twins longer than necessary before shaking his head and laughing softly. "You two look like someone I've seen before," he said, then brushed it off as coincidence. Mariana did not correct him. She did not flinch. She simply returned to shelving books. The truth lived quietly beneath their days, Not hidden, not proclaimed, just present in the way Jessie tilted her head when thinking, or the way Gibson fell silent when something mattered. As the twins grew, so did their world. Jessie discovered a love for music, listening intently to old records at the back of the shop, fingers tracing the grooves like they held secrets. She wrote small stories in a notebook she kept tucked beneath her pillow, never asking anyone to read them. Gibson began fixing things around town, a broken lamp at the diner, a stubborn doorbell at the post office, a wobbly shelf in the bookstore. People started bringing him problems like small offerings, amused and impressed in equal measure. Mariana watched them with quiet pride, not because they were exceptional, but because they were becoming fully themselves. Late one evening, after the shop had closed and the street had gone still, Mariana sat alone at the front counter. The lamp cast a warm circle of light over her hands as she balanced the day's receipts. The door was locked, the town slept, the lake rested in darkness beyond the windows. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small wooden box, the same one she had carried from New York without telling anyone. Inside lay photographs, not many. A young man laughing beside her by the river. The same man sitting at a corner cafe table, eyes tired but alive. A distant skyline glowing behind them on a cool night. Jessie and Gibson did not know these images yet. They would, one day. For now, Mariana studied them in silence. Her expression did not soften, it did not harden, it simply held. She closed the box gently and slid it back into its place. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees along the lake, sending a faint ripple across the water. Inside, the bookstore felt steady, solid, alive in its quiet way. Mariana rose, turned off the lamp, and walked toward the small back room where her children slept. Down the hall, Jessie lay curled beneath her blanket, breathing slow and even. Gibson sprawled diagonally across his bed, one arm dangling over the side, clutching a half-finished sketch. Mariana paused in the doorway, watching them without intrusion. Two lives, two futures, two pieces of a past they did not yet fully understand. She did not regret leaving New York. She did not romanticize what she had lost. In another part of the world, a billionaire CEO still stood above a city that believed he controlled everything. But upstate, in a quiet town by a lake, Mariana had built something far less visible and far more powerful. A life rooted in truth, a family shaped by presence, and two children who, without knowing it, carried their father's face and their mother's strength toward a future that would eventually bring all of them back into the same orbit. For now, the night held them gently, and in that stillness, Mariana walked back to her own room, certain of one thing she had learned with absolute clarity. You can leave a man, but you never truly leave the consequences of choice. You simply learn how to carry them with grace. The years did not crawl for Chandler Glover. They aligned around him. Glover Innovations expanded with the inevitability of a rising tide. What had once been a single headquarters now stretched across continents, its systems woven into transit grids, financial networks, and digital infrastructure that millions relied on without ever knowing his name. Cities adopted his technology. Governments courted his approval. Rivals recalibrated their strategies whenever he moved. His calendar became a map of the globe. Morning in Berlin negotiating smart transit contracts, afternoon in Singapore presenting security architecture to regulators, evening in New York leading board meetings that shifted markets with a sentence. His face appeared on glossy magazine covers beneath confident headlines. Panel moderators introduced him with reverence. Journalists treated his opinions like predictions rather than perspectives. He spoke with surgical clarity. No wasted words, no hesitation, no vulnerability. Every answer felt measured, every gesture deliberate. The more power he accumulated, the cleaner his public image became. Private jets replaced commercial flights. Penthouse suites replaced hotel rooms. Assistants anticipated his needs before he voiced them. Doors opened without knocking. To the world, Chandler looked unshakable. Inside his company, his presence commanded a near-religious quiet. Engineers worked longer hours when he walked the floor. Executives trimmed their explanations, knowing he saw through excess instantly. Decisions moved faster simply because he had spoken. Acquisitions came and went like well-calculated moves on a chessboard. A failing cybersecurity firm absorbed and restructured overnight. A struggling urban tech startup folded seamlessly into his ecosystem. A once formidable competitor quietly dismantled after a single strategic shift. Every victory reinforced the same message. Chandler Glover did not react to the future. He engineered it. Yet, as his influence grew, his world grew more curated. His penthouse became even more immaculate. His circle narrowed to those who matched his pace. His personal life flattened into something efficient, minimal, and controlled. There were parties, dazzling ones, but he attended them like a spectator inside his own life. Conversations orbited him rather than including him. People laughed, clinked glasses, and angled themselves for proximity, but rarely for truth. Romance appeared occasionally in headlines or rumors, never in substance. He dated, briefly, discreetly, strategically, women who fit neatly into the life investors approved of and the media celebrated. None of them lingered. None of them unsettled him. None of them asked him to remember who he was. From the outside, Chandler had everything he once told himself he needed: power, reach, certainty, control. And yet, beneath that polished ascent, something inside him began to hollow out, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a room growing emptier without anyone noticing the missing furniture. The world bent to him, but nothing inside him softened. And in that widening space between triumph and fulfillment, the years moved forward, clean, relentless, and quietly lonely. Success made Chandler's nights longer. His penthouse remained pristine, cold lines of glass and marble, lights calibrated to perfection, silence designed rather than lived in. Assistants left only what he asked for. Cleaners arrived before dawn and vanished without trace. Nothing in the space intruded on him. And yet, it was the emptiest place he owned. Most evenings ended the same way. The last meeting closed, the last call disconnected. His team signed off with careful professionalism. The city below shifted into its late-night rhythm. Fewer sirens, slower traffic, lights flickering off one by one in distant towers. Chandler stood at the window, always in the same spot. A glass of whiskey rested loosely in his hand, though he rarely tasted it. His reflection hovered faintly against the skyline, clean suit layered over a field of moving lights. From this height, people became pinpricks, problems became abstractions, and the world looked orderly in a way it never truly was. He did not think of spreadsheets or strategy. He did not rehearse speeches or refine arguments. Instead, his mind drifted, unwillingly at first, then inevitably, to a different river, a different night, a different version of himself. He saw Mariana leaning against the railing, hair brushing her cheek, eyes steady as the water moved beneath them. He remembered the way she spoke without dramatics, the way she listened without flinching, the way she asked him to stay human rather than impressive. Sometimes, the memory arrived as a simple image, her profile against the darkening sky. Other nights it came with sound, the softness of her voice asking, "Do you still see me?" He never reached for his phone. He never searched for her. He told himself he had made his choice with clarity, not regret. Still, the window became a place where that certainty quietly loosened. In boardrooms he was decisive. At summits he was unshakable. In interviews he was composed to the point of being untouchable. Alone he was less certain. There were moments, brief, unguarded, when he caught himself leaning slightly closer to the glass, as if distance might offer an answer rather than insulation. He thought of the apartment they once shared, of the way the lamp glowed over the dining table, of how she used to sit across from him with tea cooling between her hands. He remembered her steady presence more than her absence, which somehow made the emptiness sharper. He never framed this as loneliness. He framed it as focus. But the quiet inside his chest grew wider each year. Parties left him colder than when he arrived. Accolades felt lighter. Headlines blurred together. Even victories, acquisitions finalized, deals closed, cities transformed, landed with diminishing weight. Late at night, when the building systems hummed and the city softened, he sometimes pressed his palm against the glass and felt nothing but the barrier it created. Not protection, not triumph, just separation. Below him, millions of lives intersected, collided, and connected. Above them, Chandler stood isolated in the very height he had chased. Once, after a particularly brutal negotiation that secured a multi-billion-dollar contract, his team celebrated late into the night. Champagne flowed, applause filled the room. The company praised him as visionary, decisive, unparalleled. He slipped away early, back to the penthouse, back to the window, back to the same view that had once validated him. This time, it felt thinner. He lifted his glass, then set it down untouched. For a long moment, he simply watched the city breathe, lights flickering, bridges glowing, distant traffic threading through darkness. Somewhere in that vast expanse, Mariana lived a life that no longer included him. Somewhere years were passing that he would never recover. He did not crumble. He did not confess. He simply remained at the window, motionless, composed, and unmistakably alone. A man who had conquered the world, yet could not escape the quiet echo of the one person who had once seen him clearly. The skyline glittered. The night deepened. And in that recurring stillness, Chandler Glover stood suspended between what he had gained and what he had lost. Not collapsing under the weight of it, but carrying it silently night after night as the years moved forward without hesitation. The envelopes arrived on the same morning, cream-colored, heavy paper, the kind that carried weight before they were ever opened. They sat on the front counter of Willow and Page beside the register, addressed neatly in black ink. Jessica Torres. Mariana noticed them immediately. not because she expected anything extraordinary, but because official letters were rare in a town where most news traveled by word of mouth. She turned them over once, noting the embossed seal, the return address from New York. Jessie reached for hers first. She examined the envelope carefully, running her fingers along the edges as if listening for something beneath the paper. Gibson hovered close, already impatient, already guessing. Mariana smiled faintly. "Open them!" Jessie slid a finger beneath the seal with deliberate care. Gibson tore his open immediately. Silence followed. Brief, focused, unmistakable. Jessie read slowly, eyes moving line by line. Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly, a quiet alertness settling into her shoulders. Gibson's reaction was faster. "Wait," he said, scanning again. "Read this part. Read it again." Mariana watched them both without interrupting. The letters were identical in substance, different only in name. They had been accepted into an elite science and innovation program in New York, a competitive initiative designed to bring promising young minds together under the guidance of industry leaders. Full scholarships, housing included, travel arranged. Jessie lowered the letter, thoughtful. "This is serious," she said. Gibson grinned, eyes bright. "This is huge." Mariana felt the shift immediately. Not fear, not resistance, gravity. New York had remained distant for years, a place folded neatly into the past, acknowledged but untouched. Now it pressed gently against the present, not with force, but with opportunity. "You don't have to decide today," she said calmly. Jessie nodded, already weighing implications rather than excitement. Gibson barely heard her. "This program is run by real engineers, people who actually build things." "Yes," Mariana replied, "and it will ask a lot from you." Jessie looked up. "Do you think we're ready?" Mariana met her gaze honestly. "I think you're capable," she said. Readiness grows. The shop bell chimed as a customer entered. Life continued around them with its usual rhythm, indifferent to the quiet turning point unfolding at the counter. That afternoon, Jessie sat by the lake with her letter folded carefully in her pocket, staring across the water as if measuring distance rather than depth. Gibson spread his letter out on the floor of his room, circling phrases, scribbling notes in the margins, already imagining what he might learn. Mariana watched them both from the doorway. This was not a confrontation. This was an opening. That evening, after the shop closed and the town settled into its familiar quiet, Mariana moved to the back room and opened the drawer beneath the counter. Inside rested the small wooden box. She lifted it gently, resting it on the table without opening it yet. Her fingers lingered on the lid, thoughtful, steady. The past had stayed where she placed it for a reason, but the future had a way of stepping closer without asking. She looked down the hallway toward her children's rooms, listening to the low murmur of their voices, Jessie asking careful questions, Gibson answering too quickly. New York had found its way back into their lives, not with noise, not with force, just with two letters, quietly waiting to be answered. That night did not feel ordinary, not loud, not tense, just charged with a subtle awareness that something had shifted beneath the surface of their lives. After dinner, Mariana washed the last dishes while Jessie dried them and placed them carefully in the cupboard. Gibson remained at the table, pencil moving quickly across a notebook as he sketched what the New York campus might look like. Buildings stacked like circuits, bridges like clean lines of code. The house was steady around them, a quiet clock ticking in the hallway, floorboards creaking faintly as the old structure settled, the lake breathing softly beyond the trees. When everything was finished, Mariana turned off the kitchen light and gestured toward the living room. "Sit with me," she said simply. Jessie folded herself into the corner of the couch, legs tucked neatly beneath her. Gibson sprawled on the floor with his notebook, still half lost in his designs but attentive enough to listen. Mariana returned, carrying the small wooden box. It was unremarkable at first glance, smooth, dark, slightly worn at the edges from years of being handled carefully. No engraving, no decoration, just something chosen for durability rather than display. She placed it gently on the coffee table. The twins stilled, not in fear, in recognition that this mattered. Jessie's eyes moved from the box to her mother's face. Gibson sat up straighter, curiosity sharpening into something more serious. Mariana did not open it immediately. Her hands rested lightly on the lid, steady, unhurried. She looked at them both, not as children, not as people to be shielded, but as individuals capable of holding complexity. "You received an opportunity today," she said quietly. "One that leads back to a place I left a long time ago." Jessie nodded slowly. "New York." Gibson leaned forward. "Is this about that?" Mariana considered him, then slid the box closer. "It is," she said simply. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a small stack of photographs, not many but enough. Jessie reached first. She handled them with care as if they might tear or disappear if she moved too quickly. The first image showed a young man sitting at a corner table in a cafe, head bent over a battered laptop, surrounded by books and empty cups. His hair was messy, his eyes tired but alive, his focus absolute. Jessie studied his face quietly. The second photograph showed him laughing beside Mariana by the river, younger, less polished, shoulders relaxed, light catching his profile in a way that felt open rather than guarded. Gibson leaned in without realizing how close he had come. "Why does he look?" he began, then stopped, searching for the right word. "Familiar?" Mariana finished gently. Gibson nodded. Jessie placed that photo on the table and lifted another. This one captured a night skyline behind them, the city glowing in neat vertical lines while Mariana stood beside him, both of them framed by the dark water. She did not speak for a long moment. Gibson flipped through the remaining images more quickly, not carelessly, but analytically, as if cataloging similarities rather than emotions. Same dark eyes, same thoughtful tilt of the head, same quiet intensity beneath the surface. Neither twin said his name. Mariana did not offer it. Instead, she closed the box slowly once they had seen enough and rested her hands on top of it. Jessie looked up first. "Is this him?" she asked, not accusing, just certain. Mariana met her gaze without hesitation. "He was once someone very important to me," she replied evenly. No embellishment, no bitterness, no softening. Gibson leaned back against the couch, arms folded, eyes still thoughtful. "Why show us now?" he asked. Mariana considered the question carefully. "Because if you choose New York, pieces of this will find you whether I explain them or not," she said. "I would rather you see them with clarity than discover them by accident." Jessie placed her palms flat against the table, breathing slowly. "It doesn't change anything," she said after a beat. Mariana's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It doesn't have to." Gibson tapped his pencil against his notebook, mind already working through layers of meaning. "He looks different in these," he said. "Less like the people you described." Mariana gave a small nod. "People are more than the choices they make." Silence settled again, not heavy, just thoughtful. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees along the lake. Inside, the lamp cast a warm circle of light over the three of them, the photographs and the closed wooden box. Jessie gathered the images carefully and slid them back inside, aligning them neatly before closing the lid. She did not look frightened. She did not look angry. She looked clear. Gibson leaned his head back against the couch, staring up at the ceiling for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "So New York," he said quietly. "That's where all of this leads." Mariana did not answer immediately. She simply placed her hand over the box, then over her heart, then looked at her children, not as a mother protecting them from the past, but as a woman preparing them for the future. "You decide where you go," she said. "The rest will follow in its own way." Jessie glanced once more at the box, then at her brother. Gibson met her gaze. Neither of them spoke. But in that shared silence, something shifted, not dramatic, not loud, just steady and inevitable. The letters still lay folded on the table. The photographs rested quietly in the box. And beyond the walls of their small house, far past the lake and the trees, New York waited, not as a threat, not as a promise, just as a world they were now beginning to step toward. For the first time, the past was no longer only Mariana's. It had become part of theirs. And without confrontation, without spectacle, without fanfare, Jessie and Gibson took their first quiet step into a story much larger than the town that had raised them. Morning arrived clean and unhurried. Light slipped through the curtains in pale strips, falling across the kitchen table where the 2 acceptance letters still lay folded from the night before. The lake outside was glass smooth, holding the sky in a mirror that barely moved. Mariana brewed coffee and placed 3 cups in their usual spots. Jessie came down first, hair tied back, letter already tucked neatly into the back pocket of her jeans. She did not look uncertain, only thoughtful, as if she had spent the night weighing the world and finding her place within it. Gibson followed moments later, sketchbook under one arm, eyes bright in that focused way he got when an idea had fully formed. They did not speak at first. They simply sat, the familiar rhythm of their small household grounding them, spoon against ceramic, a clock ticking in the hallway, a breeze lifting the curtains just enough to let in cool air. Finally, Jessie placed her letter flat on the table. "I want to go," she said quietly, not excited, not fearful, just certain. Mariana met her gaze. "Why?" Jessie considered for a beat. "I want to see how big the world is," she said, "and I want to understand where I come from without being swallowed by it." Gibson rested his chin in his hand, pencil tapping lightly against the table. "I want to go because I need to know how things work at the highest level," he said. "Not in books, not in small rooms, in real systems." He paused, then added, softer, "And I think this is where we're supposed to step next." She looked at each of them carefully, not as children leaving her, but as individuals choosing their path with clarity. "Then you will go," she said simply. No resistance, no sentimental hesitation, just steady acceptance. Jessie folded her letter again, this time with purpose. Gibson reached for his, already scribbling notes in the margin about deadlines and preparations. Later that day, they walked together along the lake. No speeches, no promises, just three people moving side by side beneath a wide open sky. The town felt smaller in that moment, not confining, just complete in what it had given them. Back at Willow and Page that evening, Mariana packed their scholarship's paperwork carefully, slid it into an envelope, and placed it in the outgoing mail. The wooden box remained beneath the counter, closed, unmoved, waiting. For now, it was enough that Jessie and Gibson knew it existed, that their story did not begin only with them, but would continue because of them. That night, as the twins prepared for bed, Mariana stood in their doorway and watched them pack small things that mattered: Jessie's favorite notebook, Gibson's worn toolkit, a few books they could not imagine leaving behind. Outside, the lake caught the moonlight and held it. Inside, the house felt steady, familiar, and quietly different all at once. Jessie paused at her door. "Are you coming with us?" Mariana smiled faintly. "For part of it, not all of it." Gibson looked up. "You're not afraid?" She shook her head. "I raised you to move forward, not to stay still." They did not hug dramatically, and when the lights finally went out, two teenagers lay awake in separate rooms, not anxious, not overwhelmed, just alert to the shift already underway. Somewhere far beyond the lake, beyond the town, beyond everything they had known, a glass skyline waited, not as destiny, not as threat, just as a world they were now stepping into, calmly, deliberately, together. The past had opened a door, the future had answered, and without confrontation, without spectacle, without noise, Jessie and Gibson began to cross the threshold into the life that would eventually bring them face to face with the man whose image rested quietly in a wooden box beneath a bookstore counter. The hall looked like the future given physical form. Glass rose in clean planes from floor to ceiling, broken only by seamless digital displays that floated in mid-air like controlled constellations. Holographic models of cities rotated slowly above the stage, transit grids glowing in cool light, data streams moving like disciplined currents, infrastructure breathing in perfect rhythm. Everything felt designed to impress before a single word was spoken. Rows of seats curved toward the stage in precise alignment, filled with journalists, government officials, investors, engineers, and industry leaders. Laptops glowed softly in laps. Cameras rested on tripods. Microphones waited like attentive sentinels. The air carried that particular stillness of high-stakes events, the kind that hums just beneath the surface, promising something important. Then the lights shifted. A soft, unified glow moved toward center stage, and the room instinctively straightened. Chandler Glover stepped into it. No hesitation, no adjustment, no visible effort. He looked as if the stage had been built specifically for him, which in many ways it had. His suit was tailored to precision, dark and immaculate, cut in lines that suggested discipline rather than extravagance. His posture was effortless, shoulders open, chin level, presence unmistakable without needing to dominate. His face carried the composed stillness of a man accustomed to being watched. Not cold, not theatrical, just certain. Applause rolled through the room, controlled, respectful, almost reverent. Chandler waited until it settled naturally, hands resting lightly at his sides, gaze sweeping the audience with calm authority. When he spoke, his voice filled the space cleanly, measured, confident, uncluttered. He did not sell, he did not perform, he presented a vision. Glover Innovations' latest breakthrough, a fully integrated urban intelligence system capable of coordinating transit, energy, security, and emergency response in real time. Diagrams appeared behind him in smooth transitions, cities lighting up as if breathing in unison. Every movement of his hand seemed intentional. Every pause felt strategic. Executives leaned forward. Journalists typed. Engineers nodded. This was the version of Chandler the world knew, the architect, the strategist, the man who rewrote how cities functioned. He moved across the stage with quiet command, never rushed, never indulgent. When he explained complex systems, they sounded simple, not because they were, but because he understood them so completely. At one point, a subtle ripple of approval moved through the room as a simulated city responded flawlessly to a crisis scenario projected above him. Traffic rerouted. Power grids balanced. Emergency routes opened in perfect coordination. Chandler did not smile. He simply continued. The stage lights reflected faintly off the glass behind him, layering his figure over the glowing skyline displayed in the hologram. A man standing literally and symbolically above the world he was shaping. To anyone watching, this was not just a presentation. It was proof. Proof of power, proof of control, proof of mastery. Chandler spoke of efficiency, resilience, and progress with the ease of someone who had spent years turning abstract ideas into functioning reality. And for a moment, just one, the room seemed to orbit him completely. Then, mid-sentence, something almost imperceptible shifted. His gaze, which had been sweeping smoothly across the crowd, paused. Not visibly, but deliberately. His eyes landed, not on a journalist, not on an investor, not on a government official, but on two figures seated side by side in the front row. A boy, a girl, still, attentive, unmistakable. The lights, the screens, the audience, none of it moved. But inside Chandler something did, a tiny fracture in his composure, so small that no one else could see it, yet unmistakably there. They were impossible to overlook once seen. Front row, center right, exactly where rising students had been seated by the program coordinators. Not pushed forward, not hidden, simply placed where excellence was meant to sit. Jessie sat upright, hands folded loosely in her lap, her gaze steady rather than dazzled. She did not gawk at the holograms or the spectacle around her. She observed, carefully, patiently, as if weighing every word Chandler spoke against something internal and quiet. Gibson leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, eyes alive with focused intensity. His attention was not scattered across the room. It was trained, almost surgical, on the systems unfolding above the stage. Every simulation, every diagram, every motion of Chandler's hand seemed to land directly with him. They did not whisper, they did not react outwardly, yet their presence carried a stillness that set them apart from the rest of the crowd, less impressed, more attentive, as though they understood the language of the room without being intimidated by it. For Chandler, the world narrowed, not with noise, not with chaos, just with a subtle tightening that made the air feel thinner. The edges of the hall softened, the screens lost their sharpness, the hum of the room slid into a distant background. Applause that had been building somewhere behind him faded into something faint and hollow. His voice did not falter. His posture did not change, but something inside him stuttered. He recognized them before his mind could fully process why. Not in name, not in memory, in resemblance. Same dark eyes, alert, thoughtful, impossible to misread. Same quiet intensity beneath their differences. Same way of holding themselves, as if they carried weight without dramatics. A breath moved silently through his chest. Then beyond the twins, at the back of the hall partially framed by glass and light, he saw her. Mariana, not standing among the press, not near the executives, not seeking attention, simply there, still, unhurried, unbroken. Time had touched her lightly, a little more composure in her posture, a little more steadiness in her gaze, but nothing essential had changed. She held herself with the same quiet certainty she always had, as if the room's grandeur meant nothing compared to her own internal clarity. Their eyes met. No flinch, no apology, no accusation, just recognition, clean, mutual, absolute. For an instant the years collapsed. The cafe table with too many empty cups, the river at dusk, the storm-lit apartment, the door that had closed without drama. None of it needed to be spoken. It lived plainly in that single look. Chandler felt the composure that had carried him through countless negotiations shift, not shatter but lean. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly against the podium. Color slipped from his face with quiet speed, leaving it pale, drawn, unmistakably exposed in a way no camera could soften. The audience did not notice. They saw a poised CEO pausing for effect. Only Mariana saw the truth. Only Jessie and Gibson sensed something had shifted, not in the room but in the man on stage. Jessie's gaze sharpened slightly, as if she were seeing past the tailored suit and polished authority to something more human beneath. Gibson stilled, curiosity deepening into something closer to recognition. No one spoke. No one moved toward anyone else. The hall continued around them, lights steady, screens glowing, cameras capturing every second. Yet the real moment unfolded in silence between four people who had just found themselves standing on the same axis for the first time. Chandler did not step back. He did not stumble. He simply stood there, powerful, exposed, immobile, held in place by two familiar faces in the front row and the woman he had once chosen to walk away from at the back of the room. For a heartbeat, the future he had engineered felt less certain, not fragile, not collapsing, just confronted. And in that quiet, suspended instant, before any truth could be spoken, everything important had already landed. The presentation continued, technically. Chandler's voice moved forward, but something in it had thinned, still controlled, still precise, yet no longer entirely his own. The hologram shifted behind him in smooth, programmed sequences, transit lines weaving together, grids stabilizing, data streams flowing in perfect order. No one in the hall noticed anything wrong. That was the strangest part. The crowd leaned in, cameras captured, assistants scribbled notes, officials exchanged quiet nods of approval. The machine of the event kept running exactly as designed, and yet, at the center of it all, Chandler felt time tilt. His eyes returned, again not by choice, to the front row. Jessie watched him with that steady, patient focus, as if she were reading more than his words. Not judging, not dazzled, simply seeing. Gibson's attention had shifted. He was no longer tracking the technology alone. He was tracking Chandler, studying him the way he studied circuits, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, truths beneath the surface. Behind them, Mariana did not move. She did not step forward. She did not look away. She did not soften or harden. She simply remained, a calm axis around which the moment quietly turned. A subtle ripple moved through Chandler's chest. Not panic, not regret, recognition. He finished a sentence, let the hall's polite applause rise and fall, and turned slightly toward the main screen. For a fraction of a second, his reflection layered over the glowing model of the city he had built. He looked older like this, not in years, in cost. The demonstration reached its final sequence. The simulated city stabilized, every system humming in seamless coordination. A flawless result, a perfect performance. The room responded exactly as expected. Applause swelled, measured, and admiring. Chandler inclined his head in acknowledgement, the practiced gesture of a man who had done this countless times. But his eyes did not return to the crowd. They returned to the twins, then to Mariana. 3 still points in a sea of motion. No one spoke, no one approached, no one needed to. In that quiet geometry of gazes, stage, front row, back of the room, an entire history had already been communicated without a single word. Jessie held his stare calmly, neither welcoming nor rejecting. Gibson's expression shifted from curiosity to something steadier, heavier, more certain. Mariana's face remained unchanged, not triumphant, not wounded, simply clear. The applause softened, the lights held. The moment did not break, it simply existed, clean, sharp, undeniable. Chandler lowered his hands to the podium and exhaled, so subtly that no microphone would have caught it. The empire he stood above had not cracked, it had been seen, not as spectacle, not as proof, but as part of a much larger story that had just stepped fully into the same room. For the first time in years, Chandler Glover was not only being watched, he was being recognized. And that recognition carried more weight than any headline, contract, or title he had ever earned. Before we move on, take a breath and sit with this moment. If you were in that hall, seeing what Chandler just saw, what would you feel? Chandler canceled everything, not gradually, not quietly through assistance, directly. Before the applause in the hall had even faded, he stepped off stage and gestured to his chief of staff with a single, unmistakable look. No explanation was needed. Within minutes, messages moved through his organization like a silent current. Meetings postponed, briefings deferred, calls rerouted, commitments erased from the calendar. The machine that normally bent around his time simply stopped. Executives exchanged glances. Journalists speculated in low voices. Program coordinators scrambled to adjust. None of it reached him. Chandler moved through the building with deliberate speed, not rushed, not frantic, focused in a way that felt different from his usual precision. There was no performance in it now, no optics, no consideration of image, only purpose. The glass corridors reflected him in long, clean lines as he walked. Polished floors absorbed the sound of his steps. Screens lining the walls replayed fragments of his presentation on a loop, simulated cities stabilizing, systems harmonizing, progress made visible. He barely registered them. At the far end of the floor, a discreet lounge overlooked the skyline, a space meant for private discussions, high-to-level negotiations, and carefully managed moments away from public view. The doors slid open without a word. Mariana stood near the window, not leaning, not waiting anxiously, simply positioned where the city stretched out before her in controlled brilliance. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, posture steady, eyes clear. She had not come to make a scene. She had not come to confront him in front of an audience. She had come because the moment required honesty, and she did not shy away from that. Chandler paused at the threshold. For a fraction of a second, the room felt too small for the distance between them, too bright for the years that had passed, too quiet for everything that hung unspoken in the air. Then he stepped inside. The doors closed behind him with a soft final hiss. No assistants, no security, no intermediaries, just the two of them, and a city that believed he controlled it, unaware of how exposed he suddenly felt within its glass walls. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see the familiar steadiness in her gaze, far enough to respect the space she carried with her. For a moment, neither spoke. Below, Manhattan moved in its usual disciplined rhythm, traffic threading through streets, lights flickering across towers, lives intersecting in patterns he had once convinced himself he could fully predict. Chandler broke the silence first, his voice low, controlled, but no longer polished for an audience. You knew. Not a question, a quiet acknowledgement. Mariana turned slowly from the window to face him. Her expression did not shift. I suspected, she said simply. He studied her face. the same calm composure that had unsettled and anchored him years ago. Time had refined it, not softened it. Chandler inhaled, then exhaled, steadying himself in a way that had nothing to do with public image. "I canceled my schedule," he said. No justification, no flourish, just fact. Mariana inclined her head slightly. I noticed. A thin pause settled between them, not awkward, not theatrical, just loaded with everything they had lived separately, and everything that now pressed them back into the same space. Chandler's gaze flicked briefly to the city, then back to her. "I didn't expect," he began, then stopped. He did not finish the sentence. Mariana did not rescue him from it. She simply waited. The lounge felt suddenly smaller, not because of walls, but because of the gravity of the moment they were stepping into. Outside, screens flickered, elevators hummed. Deals moved forward without him. Inside, two people stood face to face for the first time in years, neither hiding, neither performing, both fully aware that this conversation would not be shaped by power, optics, or strategy, only by truth. And Chandler, for the first time since the showcase began, felt the full weight of that. The lounge remained still. The city beyond the glass moved as it always did, precise, efficient, indifferent. From this height, Manhattan looked clean and orderly, a system humming exactly as Chandler liked to believe his own life did. Inside, the air felt different, not tense, not charged, simply truthful. Mariana finally broke the silence, not by filling it, but by grounding it. "You looked at them," she said quietly, not accusing, not softening, just stating what had happened. Chandler exhaled slowly. Her gaze stayed steady on his. "Did you know, or did you recognize?" The distinction was clean and deliberate. He considered the question carefully before answering. "Recognize," he said. "Before I understood anything." A faint pause. Mariana nodded once, as if that answer had always been inevitable. Chandler shifted his weight, not out of discomfort, but as though the room itself had forced him to adjust. "They look like me," he said, not as pride, not as shock, simply fact. No embellishment, no defensiveness, no hesitation. The word landed clearly. Chandler turned slightly toward the window, hands resting loosely at his sides. His reflection hovered faintly over the city, powerful, composed, distant, layered against a world he had shaped and yet suddenly felt apart from. "I built all of this," he said, more to himself than to her. "Every system out there, every structure, every decision that carries my name." Mariana watched him without interruption. "And yet," he continued quietly, "I stood on that stage and felt smaller than I ever have." Her expression did not change. She did not comfort him. She did not challenge him. She simply waited. He turned back toward her. "I didn't know," he said, voice controlled but no longer polished. "Not until today." Mariana studied him carefully, as if measuring the weight of that statement. "I believe you," she said. No sarcasm, no bitterness, just clarity. A thin line of tension moved across his jaw. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Not harsh, not entitled, simply honest. Mariana inhaled slowly before answering. "Because telling you would have meant inviting you back into a life you had already chosen to leave," she said evenly. "And I wasn't going to rebuild something you had walked away from just to keep it standing for you." The words were not cruel, they were clean. Chandler absorbed them without looking away. He nodded once slowly. The silence returned deeper now, not awkward, but layered with everything they had lived separately. Mariana finally stepped away from the window, closing the distance between them just enough that the space felt intentional rather than confrontational. Her voice softened slightly, not in tone, but in precision. "You stood on that stage like a man who believes his choices were inevitable." She did not waver. They weren't. The room seemed to narrow around that truth. Chandler's breath moved more deliberately. "I chose what I thought I had to choose," he said quietly. Mariana tilted her head just enough to be noticed. "No," she replied. "You chose what you were afraid to lose, a beat." Then calmly, without anger, "You walked away from it." The line landed cleanly, not shouted, not dramatized, simply placed between them like a fact that could not be negotiated. Chandler did not flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted, not breaking but finally moving. He looked toward the floor for a moment, then back at her. "I thought power would keep me safe," he said, voice lower now. "I thought distance would make me untouchable." Mariana listened. "And today?" she asked quietly. He glanced again toward the skyline, the same view that had once validated him. "I saw two people who proved that distance doesn't erase consequences," he said. "Only delays them." Mariana's expression remained steady. "I didn't come here to punish you," she said, "and I didn't bring them here to corner you." He met her eyes fully. Then why are you here? A quiet pause. Because pretending the past doesn't exist doesn't make it disappear, she replied. And because they deserve to see who you are, not who headlines say you are. Chandler absorbed that in silence. He straightened slightly, no longer the untouchable CEO, but simply a man standing in a room with a woman who knew him too well to be impressed. For a moment, neither spoke. The city continued its disciplined rhythm outside the glass. Inside, something far messier and far more human was finally being named. Mariana folded her hands lightly in front of her. They are not your redemption, she said clearly, and they are not your failure. They are their own people. Chandler nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. Her gaze softened by a fraction. Good, she replied. Because this isn't about absolution. It's about responsibility. They stood there, two adults who had lived years apart, now forced into the same moment without spectacle or performance. Finally, Mariana spoke again, quieter this time. They are downstairs. The words did not rush. They simply placed reality in front of him. Chandler's eyes flicked instinctively toward the door. Not yet. He looked back at her instead. Do they know? He asked. Mariana considered before answering. They know enough to recognize truth when they see it, she said. What they learn from you is up to you. A long beat passed. Chandler exhaled slowly, feeling the full weight of the empire behind him and the life he had stepped away from standing in front of him. No speeches, no bargains, no theatrics, just a choice, again, placed quietly in his hands. Mariana did not guide him toward it. She simply stood there, steady as ever, her honesty as unshakable as the skyline beyond the glass. And for the first time in years, Chandler Glover understood something with absolute clarity. Power had given him everything he thought he needed. But in this room, with this woman, in this silence, it meant nothing. Only his next step did. The lounge did not change. The glass remained clear. The skyline remained orderly. The room still looked like a place designed for power, not for reckoning. Yet the air inside it felt different now, thinner, stripped of everything that usually insulated Chandler from himself. He stood where he was, not moving toward the door, not retreating from it either. For a moment, the decision seemed to exist outside his body, hovering between him and Mariana like something solid he could almost touch. Below them, the building hummed in its usual rhythm, elevators sliding, footsteps passing, conversations moving forward without him. The empire continued in his absence, as it always would. Mariana did not push. She did not guide. She did not soften the moment to make it easier. She simply watched him with the same steady clarity she had always carried, the kind that did not bend for comfort or hurry for resolution. Chandler turned once more toward the window. For years this view had been his anchor, proof of his ascent, his control, his distance from everything that had once made him feel small. Now it looked flatter, not weaker, just insufficient. He saw with uncomfortable precision how carefully he had built a life that kept people at a safe remove, glass between him and the city, status between him and others, choice between him and attachment. The twins had walked through all of it without asking. Mariana had simply stood still. He exhaled slowly, the breath measured, intentional, no longer the inhale of a man preparing for a negotiation, but of someone preparing to step into something he could not calculate. He turned back toward her. I canceled my schedule, he said again, not as a statement of power this time, but as an acknowledgement of what mattered. Mariana inclined her head. Good, she replied quietly, not praise, not approval, just recognition that he had at least cleared space. A thin pause stretched between them, not empty, not uncomfortable, just necessary. Chandler's gaze flicked briefly toward the closed doors of the lounge, as if he could sense, beyond them, the presence of Jesse and Gibson somewhere in the building. He did not ask where they were. He did not ask what to say. He did not look to Mariana for instruction. Instead, he simply said, low and clear, I'll meet them. Mariana did not smile. She did not rush to reassure him. She simply nodded once. On your terms, she said, not as a CEO, not as a headline, as a person. He absorbed that. A muscle in his jaw tightened, not in resistance, but in resolve. He straightened slightly, not into his usual posture of command, but into something simpler, steadier, more human. Mariana moved toward the door and placed her hand lightly on the handle, but did not open it yet. She turned back to him one last time. They will see you, she said quietly, not the stage, not the empire. You. He met her gaze fully. And if they don't like what they see, he asked, not defensively, not dramatically, just honestly. Mariana studied him for a beat. Then that will be true too, she replied evenly, and you will have to sit with it. Chandler nodded slowly. She opened the door. The sounds of the building flowed back in, muted conversations, distant footsteps, the soft hum of systems that kept everything moving. The lounge no longer felt sealed off from the world. It felt like a room he was finally stepping out of. Mariana did not walk ahead of him. She did not fall behind. She simply stepped aside, leaving the path clear. Chandler took one measured step forward, then another. His reflection slid briefly across the glass as he passed it, suit, posture, control, layered over a city that no longer felt like proof of anything. At the threshold, he paused for a fraction of a second, not to hesitate, not to look back, just to acknowledge that this was, in its own quiet way, as decisive a moment as any deal he had ever signed. Then he moved through the doorway. The doors slid closed behind him with the same soft finality they always had. But this time they did not feel like a barrier. They felt like a line he had chosen to cross. Mariana followed at a steady distance. No one in the corridor reacted to their exit. No headlines appeared. No cameras turned. The world did not stop. And that was the point. What mattered was not spectacle. It was what waited beyond the next turn. Two teenagers who carried his face, a woman who had never stopped carrying her truth, and a man who could no longer hide behind glass. Chandler Glover had canceled his empire for a day. Now he would have to face what he had built, and what he had walked away from, without any of it standing between him and the people he had only just realized were part of his story. No speeches. No performances. Just a man moving, finally, toward his own life. They did not bring him to a boardroom. No polished table, no assistants lining the walls, no screens glowing with metrics or projections. Instead, the program coordinators guided them to a small, quiet atrium tucked behind the main hall, a space meant for breath, not performance. Glass rose overhead in a gentle curve, filtering daylight into clean, soft bands across the floor. A few low sofas sat around a simple coffee table. Potted plants softened the edges of the space, their leaves steady in the still air. Jessie and Gibson waited there, not together at first. Jessie sat on the edge of one sofa, back straight, hands resting loosely in her lap. Her gaze drifted across the room, not nervous, not impatient, simply observant. She catalogued details quietly, the way light refracted through the glass, the hum of the building beneath her feet, the rhythm of footsteps passing just beyond the atrium's threshold. Gibson stood near the railing that overlooked the lower level, leaning slightly forward, eyes tracing the clean lines of the architecture as if reverse engineering it in real time. His mind was visibly active, not restless, just focused, pulling patterns out of structure. Neither spoke, neither fidgeted. They were not here to be impressed. They were here to see. When the door slid open, they turned in unison. Chandler stepped inside. No entourage, no security, no assistant hovering half a step behind him. Just him. Jacket unbuttoned now, posture less rigid than it had been on stage, expression stripped of the polished composure he wore for the world. For a moment, all three of them simply registered one another. Jessie's gaze met his directly, steady and unhurried. She did not look startled. She did not look softened. She looked clear, as if already measuring the man in front of her against something internal she had carried for years. Gibson's eyes moved quickly at first, over Chandler's face, his hands, his stance, then slowed, settling into a more deliberate focus. Recognition did not flash across his expression. It arrived quietly, like a conclusion reached after careful calculation. Chandler stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too distant. He felt for the first time in years unsure of where to stand, not in a room, but in a moment. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Habit wanted a speech, power wanted control, image wanted perfection. None of that belonged here. He inhaled slowly instead. Jessie spoke first, not loudly, not timidly, just plainly. You canceled your schedule. It was not a question, it was an observation. Chandler inclined his head. Yes. Gibson tilted his head slightly. You don't do that. A faint, almost reluctant breath left Chandler, somewhere between acknowledgement and something softer. No, he admitted. I don't. Silence settled again, but it was not empty. It was layered, alive with everything they were all choosing not to say too soon. Mariana did not enter with him. She remained outside the atrium, visible through the glass for a moment, then stepping back out of sight, not abandoning them, just giving them space. Jessie shifted slightly on the sofa, then gestured toward the seat opposite her. You can sit, she said, not as a command, not as permission, simply as fact. Chandler lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa, folding his hands loosely in front of him. The movement felt strangely grounding, like stepping off a stage and onto ordinary ground. Gibson leaned back against the railing now, arms crossed, gaze steady. Your systems worked, he said after a beat. In the simulation. Chandler glanced at him, surprised by the directness. They did, he replied. Gibson considered that, then added quieter. They looked precise. A small pause. Clean, Jessie said softly, almost to herself. Chandler did not preen. He did not explain. He simply nodded once. For the first time since stepping inside, he looked fully at them, not as a shock, not as a problem, but as people. Jesse's eyes held the same depth he remembered from a riverbank years ago. Gibson's carried the same focused intensity he had once seen reflected in his own younger self. He felt the recognition settle, not as pride, but as reality. "I won't pretend I was there for you," he said finally. No speech, no justification, just plain truth. Both twins listened. "Because I wasn't," he continued quietly. Jesse did not look away. Gibson did not interrupt. The atrium remained calm around them, sunlight shifting slowly, air steady, the distant hum of the building continuing without them. Chandler exhaled again, slower this time. "But I want to try to do better." The words were not grand. They were not poetic. They were simply honest. Gibson studied him for a moment, then tilted his head. "You talk like you're giving a speech." A corner of Chandler's mouth twitched before he could stop it. "Old habits," he admitted. A thin pause, then, unexpectedly, Gibson huffed out a small, quiet laugh. Jessie leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "We don't need a perfect father." Chandler met her gaze fully. "We just need a real one." The sentence did not strike him like a blow. It landed like gravity. He felt something tighten in his chest, not pain, not guilt, just the weight of something he had never been asked to carry before. He did not promise. He did not overcorrect. He simply nodded, slowly, clearly. Outside the atrium, the world kept moving. Inside it, 3 people sat together for the first time. Not as symbols, not as headlines, not as consequences, but as individuals feeling their way towards something new. No one rushed. No one performed. And in that quiet, unremarkable beginning, the man who had built an empire took his first uncertain step toward being something far harder. Present. The meeting did not end with promises, no grand statements, no carefully crafted plan, just a simple exchange of numbers, times, and an unspoken agreement to try. In the days that followed, Chandler stepped back in a way few people had ever seen him do. He did not vanish from his company, but he stopped living inside it. His chief of staff was startled the first time Chandler blocked out an entire afternoon on his calendar with only one line, personal: "Do not move." No explanation, no compromise. He kept it. The first time he came to see them, he did not arrive in a motorcade or with an entourage. He showed up in a black sedan, driver waiting at the curb, jacket folded over his arm rather than draped over his shoulders. Jesse and Gibson were not waiting for him like children anticipating a gift. They were simply there, reading and tinkering, when he knocked. Mariana let him in without ceremony and then quietly stepped out to give them space. At first, conversation moved carefully. Chandler asked simple questions, not scripted, not polished. "What do you like to read? How do you think? What keeps you up at night?" Jessie answered in measured, thoughtful sentences. She spoke about music that made her feel grounded, about stories that refused easy endings, about mornings when the lake looked like glass and the world felt quiet enough to hear herself think. Chandler listened, really listened, without interrupting, without redirecting, without trying to impress her. Gibson, on the other hand, did not speak slowly. He spoke precisely. He pulled out sketches of machines, half-built circuits, diagrams that looked chaotic to anyone else but made perfect sense to him. He walked Chandler through them with the kind of focus that swallowed the room. Chandler leaned forward, not as a CEO evaluating a prototype, as someone genuinely curious. He asked questions that surprised even himself, not about scale or profit, but about why Gibson built things the way he did. Gibson noticed. He did not soften toward Chandler, but he respected the attention. Over weeks, something small but significant began to shift. Chandler learned Jessie preferred classical music in the early morning, when the house was still and light crept slowly across the floor. She wrote quietly in a battered notebook she rarely showed anyone, but sometimes left open on the table as if inviting, without asking. He learned she hated crowds but tolerated them when they had purpose. That she noticed when people were hurting even if she did not say anything. That she could sit beside silence without trying to fill it. With Gibson, Chandler discovered a different rhythm. Late nights of dismantling old radios. Conversations about how cities could be more humane rather than just more efficient. Long pauses where Gibson would stare at nothing, then suddenly scribble a solution no one else had seen. Once Chandler arrived late, genuinely late. After an unexpected board call he could not escape. He expected irritation. Instead, Gibson simply looked up from his work and said, "We saved you the hard part." Jessie slid a mug of tea toward him without comment. In those moments, Chandler felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not triumph, not relief, just a quiet sense of belonging he had not realized he had been missing. He began to bring small things. A record he thought Jessie might like, a broken device he wanted Gibson to examine. Occasionally food, never extravagant, always simple. Mariana watched from a respectful distance. She did not coach the twins. She did not mediate. She simply observed, steady as ever, allowing relationships to form without her steering them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in soft gold, the three of them sat together at the table, not talking, not performing, simply existing in shared space. Jesse turned a page. Gibson sketched. Chandler sat opposite them, hands wrapped around his mug, no phone in sight. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about the skyline, about deals, about the next move. He was thinking about them, not as symbols of what he had lost, not as proof of anything, just as people, real, complex, unmistakably his, who were slowly becoming part of his life in a way power could never manufacture. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was fixed. But something real had begun. And in that ordinary, unremarkable quiet, Chandler Glover learned a truth far harder than anything he had mastered in business. You do not rebuild a family with grand gestures. You rebuild it with presence, patience, and the humility to show up, again and again and again. Evenings began to look different for Chandler. Not every night, not all at once, but often enough that the pattern felt intentional rather than accidental. On this one, he did not meet Jesse and Gibson in the atrium or in their small upstate house. Instead, he invited them, and Mariana, to a place he had once treated like a private observatory, a quiet terrace overlooking the city, high enough that the streets below blurred into clean lines of light. No assistants hovered. No staff lingered nearby. A simple table sat in the center, 4 chairs arranged without formality, a pitcher of water and 4 glasses resting on top. Jesse and Gibson arrived first with Mariana. They did not look impressed by the view. They looked observant. Jesse moved slowly toward the glass edge, not to lean over it, just to take in the sweep of the skyline. Her eyes traced the horizon as if reading it the way she read books, patiently, thoughtfully, without rush. Gibson drifted toward the railing that framed the terrace, studying the structure itself more than the city beyond it. His fingers tapped lightly along the metal as if testing its integrity, his mind clearly working even in stillness. Mariana stood a few steps back, hands resting lightly at her sides, posture steady, gaze neither defensive nor expectant. Chandler joined them moments later. He was not in full suit this time, jacket gone, sleeves rolled just enough to look human rather than rehearsed. He carried nothing in his hands, as if deliberately choosing not to fill the space with anything performative. They did not greet him dramatically. Jesse offered a small nod. Gibson glanced up, then returned to studying the railing. Mariana met his eyes briefly, calmly, then looked back out toward the city. Chandler took the chair opposite them rather than at the head of the table. No one spoke at first. The city breathed beneath them, lights shifting, traffic moving, distant sirens threading faintly through the night. The terrace felt like a quiet island above all of it, insulated not by glass this time, but by mutual understanding. Jesse finally turned from the view and sat. Gibson followed, pulling out the chair beside her and lowering himself into it with easy familiarity. Mariana remained standing for a moment longer, then joined them, choosing the seat nearest the edge, not to keep distance, just to stay grounded. Chandler poured water for each of them, placing the glasses carefully where they could reach them. The gesture was small, unremarkable, but deliberate. He did not fill the silence with explanations. He let it settle. After a while, he spoke, quietly, without looking up from his glass. I don't expect anything to move faster than it should. Jesse met his gaze. Good, she said simply. Gibson leaned back slightly in his chair, rushing brake systems. A faint breath of a laugh escaped Chandler before he could stop it. Fair, he admitted. His attention shifted to Mariana. She did not soften, she did not harden. She simply regarded him with the same steady clarity she always had. I don't expect your forgiveness, he said, not as a performance, not as self-flagellation, just as truth. Her eyes held his for a long moment. I didn't survive for you, Chandler, she replied calmly. I survived for them. The line landed cleanly, without bitterness or flourish, simply fact. He nodded slowly. Silence returned, but it felt different now, not empty, not tense, just honest. Mariana looked out over the city again, then spoke once more, quieter this time. Not a concession, not a promise, just an opening. Chandler exhaled, almost imperceptibly. Jesse reached for her water, took a slow sip, then set the glass down carefully. Gibson rested his forearms on the table, gaze shifting between the three of them with thoughtful attention. For a while, they simply sat together. No speeches, no revelations, no dramatic turning points. Just 4 people sharing space above a city that had once defined Chandler entirely. At some point, Jesse leaned slightly toward Mariana and murmured something too low for Chandler to hear. Mariana smiled faintly, then shook her head in gentle refusal. Gibson asked Chandler a technical question about one of the systems he had seen at the showcase. Not deferential, not confrontational, just genuinely curious. Chandler answered honestly, without jargon, without grandstanding. The conversation flowed in small, uneven ways, pauses, questions, quiet acknowledgments, like something still learning how to breathe. As the night deepened, the skyline softened into a wash of steady light. Jessie glanced once toward the glass, then back at Chandler. "Being up here feels different now," she said quietly. He considered that. "It does," he agreed. Mariana rose slowly, signaling that it was time to go without saying it aloud. Jessie stood, then Gibson, each moving with the calm rhythm of people accustomed to one another. At the edge of the terrace, Mariana paused beside Chandler. "Not too close, not too distant. Show up again," she said simply. He nodded. "I will. No promises about how, no declarations of change, just a commitment to presence." As they walked away together, Mariana steady, Jessie composed, Gibson already lost in his thoughts. Chandler remained where he was for a moment longer. The city stretched out beneath him exactly as it always had, but the view felt different now. Not smaller, not weaker, just less central. He turned away from the glass and followed them toward the elevator, leaving the skyline behind without hesitation. For the first time in years, Chandler Glover did not feel like a man standing above everything. He felt like a man stepping back into something far more difficult and far more real. A life that required showing up, listening, and being seen. Again. The house was quiet in the late afternoon. Light filtered through the trees in long, steady lines, settling softly across the living room floor. The lake beyond the windows lay still, holding the sky without a ripple, as if it, too, were listening. Jessie sat at the small table near the window, her notebook open, pen resting lightly between her fingers. Gibson sprawled on the rug beside the couch, dismantling an old radio with careful precision, tiny screws arranged in neat rows like constellations on carpet. Mariana moved through the space with her usual calm. She rinsed 2 mugs at the sink, set them carefully in the rack, then wiped her hands before turning toward her children. She did not rush. She did not gather them. She simply spoke when the moment felt right. "I know today was a lot," she said quietly. Jessie glanced up, then returned her attention to the page. Gibson did not look away from his work, but his movements slowed. Mariana crossed the room and sat in the armchair between them. Not in authority, not in distance, just within reach. "You will feel things you don't have names for yet," she continued. "That's normal. No lecture, no guiding hand, just clarity." Jessie closed her notebook slowly. "I don't feel lost," she said. "Just alert." Mariana nodded. "That makes sense." Gibson placed a screwdriver carefully on the floor. "I don't trust him," he admitted bluntly, "but I also don't think he's what I imagined." Mariana did not correct him. "Both can be true," she replied evenly. A small pause settled between them. Not heavy, just thoughtful. Mariana folded her hands in her lap, voice steady. "You do not owe him warmth," she said. "You do not owe him distance either. You owe him honesty. The same honesty you owe yourselves." Jessie absorbed that quietly. Gibson leaned back against the couch, considering. Mariana's gaze softened, not in sentimentality but in quiet conviction. "I raised you to see people clearly," she continued. "Not to excuse them, not to condemn them, to understand them." Jessie met her mother's eyes. "And you?" Mariana regarded her calmly. "I will not stand between you and him," she said. "And I will not stand behind you either. I will stand beside you." Gibson exhaled slowly. "So we decide." "Yes," Mariana replied. Again and again, silence settled once more, gentle this time. Outside, the lake reflected the fading light. Inside, 3 people sat together, not preparing for confrontation, not bracing for drama, simply holding space for what came next. Mariana did not give them answers. She gave them steadiness, not protection from the truth, but the strength to face it. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, Jessie and Gibson felt something far more important than certainty. They were not being pushed. They were being trusted. They did not bring him to a grand space, no boardroom, no polished table, no assistants hovering at the edges of the room like silent witnesses. Instead, they met in a small glass atrium tucked behind the main hall, a place meant for breathing, not performing. Sunlight filtered through the curved ceiling in soft, clean bands that rested across the floor. A few low sofas sat around a simple coffee table. Tall plants softened the edges of the space, their leaves completely still. Jessie and Gibson waited there. Jessie sat on the edge of one sofa, back straight, hands resting lightly in her lap. Her gaze moved slowly around the room, not nervously, not impatiently, just observing. She took in the light, the architecture, the quiet hum of the building beneath her feet. Gibson stood near the railing overlooking the lower level, leaning slightly forward, eyes tracing the structure of the space as if he were quietly reverse engineering it in his mind. Neither of them spoke, neither fidgeted. They were not here to be impressed. They were here to see. The door slid open without ceremony. Chandler stepped inside alone. No entourage, no security, no assistant hovering half a step behind him. His jacket was unbuttoned, draped loosely over his arm instead of worn like armor. His posture was still composed, but not polished, not staged. For a moment, the three of them simply took one another in. Jessie met his gaze directly, steady and unhurried. She did not soften, she did not harden. She simply looked at him clearly, as if measuring the man in front of her against something internal she had carried for years. Gibson's eyes moved quickly at first, across Chandler's face, his hands, his stance, then slowed, settling into a more deliberate focus. Recognition did not flash across his expression. It arrived quietly, like a conclusion reached after careful calculation. Chandler stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too distant. He looked, for the first time in years, unsure of where to stand, not physically, but emotionally. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Habit wanted a speech, power wanted control, image wanted perfection. None of that belonged here. He inhaled slowly instead. Jessie spoke first, not loudly, not timidly, just plainly. "You canceled your schedule." It was not a question, it was an observation. Chandler inclined his head. "Yes." Gibson tilted his head slightly. "You don't do that." A small breath, almost a laugh, escaped Chandler before he could stop it. "No," he admitted. "I don't." Silence settled again, but it was not empty. It was layered, full of everything they were choosing not to rush. Mariana did not enter with him. She remained just outside the atrium, visible through the glass for a brief moment before stepping back out of sight, not abandoning them, just giving them space. Jessie shifted slightly and gestured toward the seat opposite her. "You can sit," she said, not as permission, not as command, just fact. Chandler lowered himself onto the sofa, folding his hands loosely in front of him. The movement felt strangely grounding, like stepping off a stage and onto ordinary ground. Gibson leaned back against the railing now, arms crossed, gaze steady. "Your systems worked," he said after a beat, "in the simulation." Chandler glanced at him, surprised by the directness. "They did," Gibson considered that, then added quietly, "They were precise," Jessie murmured almost to herself. "Clean." Chandler did not preen. He did not explain. He simply nodded once. Then, for the first time since stepping inside, he looked fully at them, not as a shock, not as a problem, but as people. Jessie's eyes carried the same depth he remembered from a riverbank years ago. Gibson's held the same focused intensity he had once seen in his younger self. He felt recognition settle, not as pride, but as reality. "I won't pretend I was there for you," he said finally. No speech, no justification, just plain truth. Both twins listened. "Because I wasn't," he continued quietly. Jessie did not look away. Gibson did not interrupt. The atrium remained calm around them, sunlight shifting slowly, air steady, the distant hum of the building continuing without them. Chandler exhaled again, slower this time. "But I want to try to do better." The words were not grand, they were not poetic. They were simply honest. Gibson studied him for a moment, then tilted his head. "You're doing the stage voice." Chandler froze for half a second. Then his shoulders dropped, just slightly. A small, almost reluctant breath of laughter escaped him. Jessie leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. "We don't need a perfect father." Chandler met her gaze fully. "We just need a real one." The sentence did not strike him like a blow. It landed like gravity. Something tightened in his chest, not pain, not guilt, just the weight of something he had never been asked to carry before. He did not promise. He did not overcorrect. He simply nodded, slowly, clearly. Outside the atrium, the world kept moving. Inside it, three people sat together for the first time, not as symbols, not as headlines, not as consequences, but as individuals feeling their way towards something new. No one rushed. No one performed. And in that quiet, unremarkable beginning, the man who had built an empire took his first uncertain step toward being something far harder. Present. They did not stay in the atrium long, not because the moment was uncomfortable, but because it did not need to stretch. What mattered had already been said, plainly, without ornament. When they stepped back into the hallway, Mariana was waiting a short distance away, leaning lightly against a glass wall, watching the slow movement of people below. She straightened as they approached, not out of tension, just attentiveness. Jessie walked beside her without speaking. Gibson drifted slightly ahead with Chandler, already asking a question about the showcase. Not confrontational, not deferential, just genuinely curious. Why did you design the transit layer that way? Gibson asked, hands tucked casually into his pockets. It looked efficient, but brittle. Chandler glanced at him, surprised again, not by the question, but by its precision. He considered for a beat. You're right, he said. It was too rigid in the prototype. We changed it after testing, but the simulation didn't reflect that update. Gibson nodded slowly, satisfied not by the answer, but by the fact that Chandler didn't posture or deflect. Jesse listened quietly, eyes drifting between them. Mariana fell into step slightly behind, close enough to see, far enough to give space. They exited onto a small outdoor path that curved around the side of the building, a quiet strip of greenery wedged between glass towers. Trees softened the hard edges of the city. Benches sat beneath them, unoccupied. They walked without hurry, not a procession, not a performance, just 4 people moving together through late afternoon light. At one point, Chandler slowed without realizing it. Jesse matched his pace immediately, as if sensing the shift. They walked side by side in silence for a few moments. Then, softly, she said, "You don't have to fill every space." He glanced at her. She wasn't scolding him. She was offering clarity. He nodded slowly. "I'm learning that." Ahead of them, Gibson stopped beside a small maintenance panel set into the side of the path. He crouched down, examining it with quiet interest, fingers tracing the seam where metal met concrete. "Your building uses modular access points like this," he said, half to himself. "Smart." Chandler stepped closer, curious rather than protective. "Most people don't notice them," he admitted. Gibson stood, dusting his hands. "Most people aren't looking." A corner of Chandler's mouth lifted. Mariana watched them, not with relief, not with suspicion, just steady awareness. They reached a low stone wall overlooking a narrow strip of water that cut through the development. Not a grand river, not a skyline vista, just a modest reflective channel where light shimmered in gentle ripples. Jessie sat first, smoothing her skirt beneath her. Gibson hopped up beside her, feet dangling off the edge. Chandler hesitated for a fraction of a second, then sat across from them, choosing a place slightly lower than where he might have stood, as if intentionally removing himself from height. Mariana remained standing nearby, hands resting lightly on the back of a bench, giving them room without disappearing. Silence settled again, not awkward, not charged, just steady. Gibson kicked his feet lightly against the stone, then looked at Chandler. "Do you always know what to say?" he asked. Chandler considered honestly. "No," he replied. "I've just been very good at pretending I do." Jessie tilted her head slightly, studying him. "That's better than pretending. You never make mistakes," she said quietly. "I've made plenty." She did not soften. She did not judge. She simply accepted the truth of it. A breeze moved through the small trees, lifting Jessie's hair slightly from her face. She tucked it behind her ear without fuss. Mariana finally stepped forward then, resting her hand briefly on Jessie's shoulder, then Gibson's, not possessively, just reassuringly. "I'll give you a few minutes," she said simply. Neither twin protested. She walked a short distance away, close enough to see them, far enough to let them exist without her presence shaping every second. Chandler watched her go, then turned back to the twins. He did not fill the space with promises. He did not try to explain his past. He simply said, low and clear, "Thank you." Gibson frowned slightly. "For what?" "For sitting with this," Chandler replied. Instead of running from it, Jessie absorbed that quietly. After a beat, she spoke again. Not louder, just steadier. "We're not here to fix you." He nodded slowly. "I know." Her gaze softened by the smallest fraction. "We're here to see if you show up." He met her eyes fully. "I will," he said. Not grandly, not perfectly, just honestly. Gibson studied him for a moment longer, then slid off the wall and stretched. "Next time," he said, "I want to see how your traffic algorithms actually behave outside simulations." Chandler exhaled, half laugh, half relief. "Next time," he agreed. Jessie slid down beside her brother, standing now, hands tucked calmly behind her back. She looked at Chandler, not as a child, not as a stranger, but as someone slowly deciding who he might be to her. "We don't need you to be extraordinary," she said quietly. "We just need you to be here." He felt that land, not like a command, but like a truth. He nodded once. Mariana returned then, stepping back into their orbit with her usual calm presence. She did not ask what had been said. She did not insert herself. She simply looked at Chandler. He met her gaze, steady now rather than defensive. No apologies, no theatrics, just mutual understanding that something real had begun. As they started back toward the building, Jessie walked slightly ahead with Mariana, speaking softly. Gibson drifted beside Chandler, already talking about a prototype idea he wanted to sketch later. For the first time since the showcase, Chandler did not feel like a man standing at the center of everything. He felt like someone finally standing with others, not above, not apart, present. And as the late afternoon light softened around them, he carried that feeling quietly, not as a triumph, not as redemption, just as the fragile, necessary beginning of something he could no longer control, only show up for. Again. And again. The change did not announce itself. No press release, no farewell tour, no grand statement about a new season of life. It appeared first on Chandler's calendar. For years, his schedule had been a perfectly engineered machine. Back-to-back meetings, flights plotted like military maneuvers, assistants moving around him with almost choreographed precision. Then, small blank spaces began to appear. Not gaps created by chaos. Gaps he chose. The first time, it confused his chief of staff. A full afternoon was blocked with a single line, personal, "Do not move." No context, no negotiation, no explanation. They tried to shift it. Chandler did not allow it. When a major media outlet requested a high-profile interview, he declined, calmly, without irritation, without theatrics. The offer would have placed him on every screen in the country for a night. A year earlier, he would have said yes without hesitation. This time, he said no. Not dramatically, just firmly. Inside Glover Innovations, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. He still attended board meetings. He still made decisions. He still shaped the company, direction with the same clarity he always had. But he no longer lived inside the building. He stopped arriving before sunrise and leaving long after midnight. He stopped turning every conversation into a strategy session. He stopped treating every moment as a performance that needed to be optimized. Some evenings, his penthouse lights stayed dark earlier than usual. No headlines commented on it. No analysts drew conclusions. Yet for those who knew him closely, the difference was clear. Chandler was stepping back, not disappearing, just loosening his grip. One night, after a tense negotiation that would have once kept him awake, he returned to his apartment and did something unfamiliar. He did not go straight to the window. He poured a glass of water instead. He sat at the dining table. He left his phone face down. For a long moment, he simply breathed. The skyline still shimmered beyond the glass, immaculate and indifferent. He looked at it, but did not lean toward it. The view no longer felt like proof. It felt like background. The next day, instead of filling the blocked afternoon with work, he drove north without announcing it. No entourage, no motorcade, just a quiet car and a route that carried him steadily away from the city. When he arrived, Mariana did not make a scene. She opened the door as if this were simply another ordinary moment in an evolving pattern, which slowly it was becoming. Jessie was at the table with her notebook. Gibson was on the floor surrounded by disassembled parts. Chandler did not try to impress them. He did not give a speech about balance or growth. He simply said, "I had time today." Jessie glanced up, thoughtful. Gibson looked at him, then nodded once. "Good," he said. Chandler sat. He did not dominate the space. He did not shrink from it. He simply occupied it, patiently, quietly, consistently. Outside, the lake held the late afternoon light. Inside, something unfamiliar settled into him. Not triumph, not relief, just a steadying sense that he was finally choosing where to stand. The empire still stood behind him. The world still bent to his influence. But for the first time in years, Chandler Glover was deliberately stepping away from the center of it, not as a sacrifice, not as penance, but as a conscious reordering of what mattered. And that shift, small as it looked from the outside, was the real beginning of his change. Chandler did not try to parent in a single style. He learned quickly that Jessie and Gibson did not require the same version of him, and that, in fact, they would not have tolerated it. With Jessie, he slowed. Their first real afternoon together did not involve plans, schedules, or curated experiences. He arrived to find her sitting at the small table near the window, a stack of books beside her, classical music playing softly from an old speaker. She did not look up immediately. He did not announce himself. He simply took the chair across from her and sat. For a while, neither spoke. Light moved slowly across the floor. Pages turned. The lake outside shifted almost imperceptibly. Eventually, Jessie closed her notebook and looked at him. "You don't have to perform," she said quietly. He considered that, then nodded. "I'm trying not to." She studied him, not skeptically, just carefully. The way she studied everything. After a moment, she slid a book across the table toward him. No explanation, no invitation, just placement. Chandler opened it. Poetry, not what he expected, and precisely what he needed. He read silently, slowly, resisting the instinct to analyze or optimize. Jessie watched him from the corner of her eye, as if measuring whether he could simply receive something without trying to improve it. When he finished the page, he looked up. She gave the smallest nod. Not approval, just acknowledgement. In those quiet hours, Chandler learned more about Jessie than he ever could have through questions. He saw how she listened to silence, how she observed before reacting, how she carried depth without needing to display it. With Gibson, the rhythm was entirely different. Their time together was kinetic. Gibson greeted him one afternoon by placing a battered device in his hands, wires exposed, casing half removed, internal components splayed like a mechanical puzzle. "Fix it," Gibson said simply. Chandler did not take offense. He rolled up his sleeves and crouched beside him on the floor. They worked in parallel, not side by side in harmony, but in a kind of focused tension. Gibson challenged him constantly, not aggressively, but precisely. "Why did you choose that structure? That solution scales poorly. You're assuming stability where there isn't any." At one point, Gibson paused, studying him. "You don't talk like the man on stage," he said. Chandler wiped his hands on a cloth. "I don't want to." Gibson considered that, then nodded once, satisfied not by the answer but by the consistency behind it. They began to talk about bigger ideas. Not just machines, but cities. Not just systems, but people inside those systems. Gibson pushed him toward questions he had avoided for years. Who benefits? Who gets overlooked? What breaks when efficiency becomes the only goal? Chandler did not dismiss any of it. He argued sometimes, thoughtfully, not defensively. More often he listened. One evening, as they spread diagrams across the table, Gibson leaned back and said, almost casually, "You're different when you're here." Chandler paused. "Different how?" Gibson shrugged. "Less shiny. More real." Chandler let out a quiet breath, somewhere between relief and something deeper. In both relationships, the bond grew not through grand gestures but through presence. He did not bring extravagant gifts. He did not overcompensate with experiences. He simply showed up, again and again, in ways that matched who each of them was. Jessie softened slowly, not toward him as a father, but toward him as a person. Gibson respected him, not as a legend, but as a mind that could meet his own. Mariana watched all of this from a steady distance. She did not interfere. She did not coach. She did not narrate what was happening. She simply observed, clear-eyed, grounded, unwavering. One night after the twins had gone to their rooms, she stood with Chandler near the window that overlooked the dark lake. He began to speak, instinctively searching for the right words. She stopped him gently with a look. Then she said, calmly and without softness, "I didn't survive for you, Chandler. I survived for them." He did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply nodded, fully, finally understanding the weight of it. She turned away then, not coldly, just complete in what she had said. Chandler remained by the window. For a long time he did not think about the skyline. He thought about Gibson's sharp questions. Nothing felt resolved, nothing felt repaired. But something was unmistakably different. Not reconciliation, not absolution, just growth, quiet, imperfect, and real. And for the first time, Chandler did not measure that growth by what he had built. He measured it by how consistently he chose to stay. The change in Chandler was never announced. It simply became visible in small, ordinary moments that would have meant nothing to the world and everything to the people closest to him. Some mornings he woke before sunrise and did not go straight to his office. Instead, he drove upstate while the city was still half asleep. He did not call ahead. He did not plan anything elaborate. He arrived, parked quietly, and walked toward the lake with a cup of coffee in his hand like any other person trying to clear their thoughts. Jessie would sometimes be sitting on the porch with her notebook open, wrapped in a light sweater, watching the water. She rarely acknowledged him at first, not out of coldness, just habit. He would sit on the steps a few feet away and watch the same view. No conversation, just shared presence. On other days, Chandler stayed late with Gibson. They worked on half-built machines sprawled across the kitchen table. Wires, tools, diagrams, messy notes. The room smelled faintly of solder and coffee. Chandler no longer rushed to be the smartest person in the room. He let Gibson lead. He asked questions instead of giving answers. Sometimes he admitted, plainly, "I don't know." Gibson respected that more than any flawless explanation. Mariana remained steady through all of this. She did not soften toward Chandler. She did not push him away either. She treated him as what he was becoming, not what he had been, and not what he might someday be. One evening, the four of them found themselves outside together as the sun dipped low. Not on a dramatic riverbank, not on a polished terrace, just along a quiet path where the grass met the water and the sky turned a soft, fading gold. Jessie walked a few steps ahead with Mariana, speaking in low, unhurried tones. Gibson walked beside Chandler, explaining an idea he had sketched earlier, something about making urban systems more humane rather than just more efficient. Chandler listened, really listened. At one point, Gibson stopped and pointed toward a cluster of lights reflecting across the water. "See that?" he said. "That's what you built." Chandler followed his gaze. The reflection shimmered, beautiful, controlled, precise. Then Gibson turned slightly and gestured behind them, toward the quiet house where they had grown up. "And that's what kept us standing." Chandler did not argue. He did not justify. He simply took that in. Mariana stood a short distance away, coffee in hand, watching them without interference. Her posture was calm, her expression unreadable, not guarded, just clear. Chandler glanced back at her. Their eyes met briefly. No promises, no apologies, no dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet mutual understanding that something had shifted, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Jessie slowed and let Chandler fall into step beside her. She did not reach for his hand. She did not pull away either. She simply walked beside him. After a moment she spoke, not loudly, just steady. "You show up more than you talk now." He considered that. "I'm trying," he said simply. Gibson caught up to them, falling into pace on Chandler's other side. He did not look at him directly, but he didn't need to. The three of them walked together. Mariana followed at a comfortable distance, neither close nor far. The skyline of Manhattan glowed faintly on the distant horizon, smaller from here, quieter, less overwhelming. Chandler noticed it. Then, just as naturally, he looked back toward Jessie and Gibson instead. No grand realization, no emotional monologue, just a subtle reordering of what mattered. When the sky finally darkened and the air grew cooler, they turned back toward the house together, not as a perfect family, not as a healed one, but as something more honest. A group of people choosing again and again to stay in the same story. As Chandler stepped inside behind them, he did not look toward the window. He looked toward the kitchen light, the familiar table, the two teenagers who were slowly becoming part of his life in a way he could no longer control, only honor. Nothing was fixed, nothing was erased, but something real had taken root, not reconciliation, not redemption, just steady, imperfect, deliberate growth, one quiet moment at a time. If this story stayed with you, made you think, or felt a little too real to be fiction, that's exactly the kind of storytelling this channel is built for. Like this video, share it with someone who appreciates depth, and leave a comment about what this story made you feel or realize. And if you want more real, grown, meaningful stories that don't insult your intelligence, subscribe to Mr. Cooper Stories and walk with me into